The Unexplained Rundown is pleased to partner with tpublic.com and bring you some fun and fantastical apparel and accessories that are truly out of this world. If you're keen to support the show and see it grow, be sure to check out some of the cool designs in the merch store and grab yourself a bargain. Use the link in the description below.
Or concern you about the unknown and the unidentified flying object?
Oh, yes, we discussed it at every conference that we had with the military, and they never were able to make me a concrete report on.
Do you have anything on the subject, sir?
No, I haven't had anything on the subject, and there's always things like that going on. The flying saucers, and they've had other things, you know.
For years, the world has seen reality distorted, facts manipulated, and truth hidden. But there's even more to the story than anyone has ever suspected. Because no one has been able to see the whole picture. Until now.
Friends, welcome back. Welcome back to another episode of the Unexplained Rundown. I'm your host, Grant Levac, and if you found this channel intentionally, then like me, you're intrigued by the unexplained mysteries of this mortal coil of ours, and you crave to know what's real and what's not. Now, it feels like it's only been a couple of weeks since last month's live stream, which it has, so wanted to bring this one to you earlier this month because there's obviously been some breaking news just this past weekend, and I was very, very, very pleased to be able to contribute to some brand new reporting out of Australia, courtesy of a great journalist, Jamison Murphy, for the Canberra Times. And that's really what we're talking about, some brand new reporting following revelations from a FOIA request that we're gonna actually walk through this evening. So obviously want to acknowledge some friends in the room. First and foremost, thank you to very generous Patreon members, Jimmy, Jasmine, Shane, Dan, YouTube member Telekinetic. Thank you, as always, guys, for your ongoing support. I truly appreciate it. If you like the content that I put out month to month and you're interested to see the show grow, feel free to give it a like, share, subscribe. You can check out some of the Patreon and YouTube membership options in the show notes below. So I want to say hi to a few friends. Jimmy, always good to see you, brother. Always here, never misses an episode. Likewise, with great to see you, Bex, here. I've been in a couple now the last couple of months, so great to see you as well. Jasmine never misses a show, so also awesome to see you in here, my friend. Mark, great to see you as always. Thank you for tuning in wherever you are in the world. If it's your Thursday morning, 6:30 a.m. in the States, or if it's 10:30 p.m. at night across the pond in New Zealand, it's always great to have some friends in the chat. Yes, it's all about the ruse tonight. The Australian symbol that everyone knows well. I don't know what I'm ranting on about there, but just saw your ruse come up in the chat there, Mark. Has Mick West gone east? The only West that I like is John West. That's the only thing I can rely on. Don't know about Mick West, but he does sometimes get it right, which is good to see. Who else we got? Akashi Chris, great to see you, my friend, as always. Welcome. Thanks for tuning in on your side of the pond so early in the morning. And we've also got a few other folks. I have to put the goggles on as always. Plant Watering Citizen. I think you're a newcomer. I haven't seen you before in the chat, so good to see you. Thanks for joining. Thanks for tuning in. Marie, wonderful to see you. Hi, welcome. Telekinetic, always good to see you, my friend. Thank you for your ongoing support as well. And it's always great to see some familiar faces and new ones in the chat. Bearded Guy Gaz, thank you, my friend. Super sticker, £3, I should say, or euros. Thank you for your support from across the pond. Not quite time for a Foster's, but hold my beer shortly because we're going to get into some good stuff. So let's pull up the trusty old slide deck. And what we're talking about this evening, folks, is how absolutely and completely oblivious the then, no longer the current, but the then Australian Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Robert Chipman, was completely oblivious of discussions that Australia was having with the United States. And this broke on Sunday in Australia. We had some wonderful, again, reporting from Jamison Murphy, a journalist. This is now his fourth story. He's been reporting on the UAP topic in an Australian context now for a good portion of really over a year, and this is his fourth article. So he's, kudos to Jamison as always for taking the topic seriously and reporting on it, doing his due diligence and reporting on it in a very with the sincerity that the topic deserves. So kudos to you, Jamison, for your work on getting this story out to the Australian public. So let's pull up for you. Now, I have included the link to Jamison's article in the show notes below. Now, unfortunately, one of the things that's a bit of a bummer about the Canberra Times is that it is behind a paywall. However, I have, if you're on X, I did include a link to the article as well as an archive version. So if you want to bypass the paywall, you can. But I'm going to read you this article from top to bottom, and we're going to go through it. We're going to break it down. So headline, title of the article: Defense says it's had no UFO briefings from the US. These newly revealed emails show otherwise. Now, again, because this is the paywall edition, I have family members in Canberra. So the Canberra Times is the leading publication in the ACT, our nation's capital in Canberra. And I heard that the article was close to front page of the Canberra Times. And why that's important, you can best bet your bottom dollar that a lot of folks within the government and defense will have read this article. So it would have been front and center for them. So let me actually pull up the article as it appeared in the digital edition. So those that get the Canberra Times on their iPad, or they subscribe to the digital version, this is the article. Now, often the digital version will have a different title than the paper version. Sometimes the titles change, but you can see this is it's a bit hard to see though. I will zoom in, and apologies if this does start to pixelate a bit, but you can see this is on page four of the Canberra Times. So it's, towards the very front on Sunday, the 1st of June. And the title of the digital edition is At Odds, UFO Briefings for Years. So by Jamison Murphy. So again, a little bit hard to see. So let me zoom on in. We're going to break it down section by section. And I know it does get a little bit degraded here, but let's kick things off. So again, kudos to Jamison for breaking this story. So it starts off with Australia has been receiving high-level briefings from the United States UFO Task Force for years, despite the repeated denials of the top military brass. Leaked emails reveal. Freedom of Information documents from December 2021 show US officials discussing a briefing regarding unidentified aerial phenomenon, the modern term for UFOs, with its Five Eyes allies. And again, we know the Five Eyes is comprised as an intelligence alliance between the United States, Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. The email chain included officials from the United States UAP Task Force and an Australian defense representative using a US Department of Defense email address. Now, is that unusual? I don't know enough about the history of Australian defense representatives being assigned US emails, so it could be quite common. I don't know. It also made me think, is it a way that correspondence between Australia and the United States and other foreign governments, is it a way that if say in this example, the defense representative from Australia is using a US issued email account, is that a way that can basically circumvent FOIA? So if I went after emails for whoever this individual was and I submit it to the Australian Department of Defense, you would expect to get a no records response, because if it's a US assigned email account, well, that is not necessarily a product of the Australian government. If it was an email account that was created and assigned within the Australian Department of Defence, that's a different story. So I don't know if that's the case, but it made me scratching my head thinking, is that a way that FOIA can be circumvented? Quote, read tomorrow's UAP briefing. I received confirmation from Australia and Canada they will be here. And of course, UK, a UAPTF official wrote. So we have confirmation in this email chain that the Five Eyes, now New Zealand is not in the mix there, and there is, I'm sure, a reasonable reason for that. Maybe it was a scheduling issue for the New Zealand representative, I don't know, but you've got 4 of the Five Eyes partners obviously locked in for a briefing that's going to be led by the UAP Task Force. And then it goes on to say, meeting rescheduled. However, a scheduling conflict led to the meeting being rescheduled for early January 2022, much to the annoyance of the office. Now, this is not quite correct, the acronym here. It's the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security. So it used to be OUSDI. It's now OUSDINS. So nothing that's major on that, the naming convention there. We all get what it is. Quote, I recall you and your team said last week that you wanted to come in today to brief the other partners, referring to the Five Eyes partners. Because of this, I urged the partners to build some time into their schedules and come in for the brief, the OUSD official wrote. The last thing we want to do is be dismissive of our allies and their time, a UAPTF official replied. We definitely would like to continue this conversation with the partners and now have an obligation to do so for multiple reasons. So it looks like the old Five Eyes were being stuffed around a little bit and they couldn't get their act together, the UAPTF with the OUSDNI, to actually organize the briefing. And we'll see that in a bit more detail in the emails as we go through. No briefing. The former Chief of Air Force and now, we'll come back up. I'm quoted there, so we'll see that as we go through. The now Vice Chief of Defense, Air Marshal Robert Chipman, just move this out of the way here, twice told senators during an estimates hearing that Australia had not been briefed on UAPs after the email exchange and rescheduled Five Eyes briefing. Now, what are we talking about there? Well, if we wind the clock back, remember in June of 2021, the 25th of June 2021, the ODNI released its preliminary assessment on UAP. Fast forward to less than a year later in May 2022, and we have our first congressional hearing on UAP in over 50 years. And Scott Bray, who was the head of the UAP Task Force, he was the one that Brennan McKernan, who was the director after Jay Stratton, Brennan McKernan reported directly to Scott Bray. And this is what Scott Bray had to say at that congressional hearing on UAP in May 2022 regarding engagement with the Five Eyes.
Effort to assemble subject matter experts from across the Department of Defense and the intelligence community and other U.S. government agencies and departments. We forged partnerships with the research, development, and acquisition communities, with industry partners, and with academic research labs, and we brought many allies and international partners into our discussions on UAP.
So that was in May 2022. We brought many allies and international partners into our discussions on UAP. So it turns out that Scott Bray, what he was testifying before Congress, looks like it was factual and accurate. And so where does that then lead us to? If we come back to where we got up to with that article, Air Marshal Robert Chipman twice told senators during an estimates hearing. Senate estimates is kind of like a budget oversight hearings in Australia, so that senators can question folks in positions of leadership and authority in government and defense to ensure that taxpayer dollars are being well spent, they're not being wasted, it's being well invested, and scrutinizing basically taxpayer spending. So told senators during an estimates hearing that Australia had not been briefed on UAPs after the email exchange and rescheduled 5O's briefing. So on the 9th of November of 2022, remember that congressional hearing that you just saw Scott Bray testify at? That was in May 2022. In November 2022, on the 9th of November, Senator Peter Whish-Wilson, the Green senator for Tasmania, and the only Australian senator that has taken this topic seriously and asked questions of those in defence and positions of leadership about UAP in Australian context. So again, all the credit to Senator Peter Whish-Wilson for taking this topic seriously in an Australian context. This is what he asked the then Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Robert Chipman, on the 9th of November of 2022.
At those hearings as saying the US had brought many allies and international partners into their discussions on UAPs. Given how close we are to the US, has there been any discussions with Australian intelligence services or the Air Force in relation to their approach?
I'm not aware of
to
any
this?
formal discussions that we've held with the US.
So you're not aware. Is that means that it just hasn't come across your desk, or?
I imagine it would have come across my desk if those discussions were held in the last 4 months, but I can take on notice and see if there's any other discussions that have been held.
Thank you.
So it begs the question, why wasn't the then Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Robert Chipman, aware that Australia was engaged in discussions with the US on UAP in December 2021? Because the Chief of Air Force is the one that leads all discussions on UAP in Australian context before Senate estimates. So he's the one that's fronting up before Senate estimates to answer senators' questions. If there's anyone that should know what's going on, it is the Chief of Air Force. So why was he not aware? Why had not it crossed his desk that there had been discussions with the United States on UAP? So then we kind of continue on with the article, and this is just recapping what I've just shown you. So in November 2022, Greens Senator Peter Whish-Wilson asked if the US had discussed UAPs with Australian intelligence services or the US Air Force. And as you saw in his response, Air Marshal Robert Chipman responded, "I'm not aware of any formal discussions that we've held with the US." Air Marshal Chipman said, "I imagine it would have come across my desk if those discussions were held in the last 4 months." During the Senate estimates hearing the following year, the Air Marshal was more adamant in response to Senator Whish-Wilson's questions, which specifically queried if Australian defence attachés had received UAP briefings. Now, before we'll stop there for a moment, because we'll actually jump on over to, I just want to show you, make sure I've got, okay, no, we'll continue on. So then we kind of get to, as we lead into this commentary here that you're just seeing, that we're about to see, is the following year in February 2023. So we had those first line of questions from Senator Whish-Wilson in November of 2022, and then in February of the following year, February 2023, on the 15th of February, Air Marshal Robert Chipman was again grilled by Senator Whish-Wilson on follow-up questions on UAP. Now, that briefing, or that estimates, which I'm going to play a clip from in just a moment, happened on the 15th of February. Now, the day prior, on the 14th of February, there was an interview on SkyNews Australia with Ross Coulthard. And what was happening around that time in February 2023? Well, the Chinese spy balloon and the shoot down of those 3 unidentified aerial objects, which still have not been fully resolved. The public does not know what those 3 unidentified aerial objects were definitively. So this is what Ross Coulthard said in an interview with Sky News the day prior to the Senate estimates hearing in February on the 15th, because these comments are important as we lead into reviewing what Air Marshal Robert Chipman's testimony was at that February Senate estimates. So this is Ross Coulthard on Sky News Australia on the 14th of February 2023.
Sees this now as a priority. And I have to say, I do think it's a concern that the official position from the Australian Defence Department is UAPs are not an issue here down under, because I can tell you, Ashley, I have spoken to jet fighter pilots, military cargo pilots, military reconnaissance pilots, civilian pilots, all of whom are telling me that they're seeing this phenomena down under as well. And there's a real concern that they don't feel confident about coming forward with this information, because the official position from the Chief of Air Staff, the Chief of Defence Force, is that we're not interested in UAPs. And it has to be asked, why? Because the United States has told me they are now engaging with Australia as an ally, inviting it to collaborate with them on UAPs. And I am told that there were oral briefings given by the UAP Task Force, a Pentagon office, to the defence attaches of Australia at the US Embassy in Washington, D.C. on UAPs. So I think Australia needs to be a lot more open about the fact that there is a mystery phenomenon being detected in our skies. I know for a fact it's being picked up at the Pine Gap facility in the centre of Australia, probably the most important American base outside of the continental USA. And I think at some stage, Australia is going to have to be dragged kicking and screaming, just like America, to acknowledging that there is a new reality in our skies of UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena. We don't know what they are. We're not saying they're alien, but whatever they are, they do need to be investigated.
Now, Ross is even aware that Australia has had discussions with the UAP Task Force on UAP, but the Chief of Air Force is oblivious to it. How is it that the head of the Royal Australian Air Force, the one that is leading all discussions on UAP, answering questions before senators in Senate estimates, is not aware of what an investigative journalist is? If there's anyone in our government that we want to have the answers, it's those in positions of leadership. So why is the Air Marshal, the Chief of Air Force, completely unaware of discussions Australia is having with the US on UAP? And that leads us nicely into, if we continue on with the article, let's continue on. So again, we got up to during the Senate estimates hearing the following year, so we're talking about February 2023, the Air Marshal was adamant in response to Senator Whish-Wilson's questions, which specifically queried if Australian defence attaches had received UAP briefings. No, Air Marshal Chipman said. No briefings at all. Senator Whish-Wilson, and let me come to the top, said no, Air Marshal Chipman repeated. So it's one thing to read it on the page. It's another thing to hear it and see it from the person that is saying it. So let me play that exchange for you from the Senate estimates hearing in February 2023.
In terms of the UAP task force, has any, for example, defence attaches in Washington had any briefings in the last 12 months around the establishment of this task force, separate to the issues that we've seen?
No, Senator.
No briefings at all?
No, Senator.
So there you go. Again, complete denial that Australia had any discussions at all with the US, the defence attaches based in Washington, D.C. Any briefings at all? No, Senator. So why again is it that the Australian Chief of Air Force is not aware that Australia is engaged in discussions on UAP? Now, after the November hearing, Senator Whish-Wilson submitted a questions on notice. And a question on notice is really, if senators usually only have a small amount of time, certainly Peter Whish-Wilson is a participating member of the Senate Estimates Committee or the portfolio for Defence, Foreign Affairs and Trade. So if he wants to ask questions at a Senate Estimates, he only gets probably about 8 to 10 minutes to ask questions. So if all of his questions aren't asked, he can submit written questions to Defence, soliciting formal responses. And so after that November, and we're kind of jumping back a bit on the dates, but after the November Senate estimates, Senator Peter Whish-Wilson submitted this written question, and I'll zoom on in so it's a bit easier on the eyes there. So again, this is basically his question was, given how this is what he asked Air Marshal Chipman in that November clip, given how close we are to the US, have there been any discussions with, and this is important, in Australian intelligence services, or not saying just the Air Force, Australian intelligence services or the Air Force in relation to their approach? And the response that was given on the 16th of December of 2022 was, the Royal Australian Air Force has not held any discussions with the United States on the topic of unidentified aerial phenomena. Well, with all due respect, Chief of Air Force Air Marshal Robert Chipman, that wasn't the complete question. The question was, have there been any discussions with Australian intelligence services or the Air Force? And the Department of Defense, this is not Robert Chipman's response, the Department of Defense provides the following answer. So they have only spoken on behalf of the Royal Australian Air Force and not the Australian intelligence services. Why? Well, there is a very good reason why. And so now that leads us into back to the Canberra Times article. If I pull this back up for us. There we go. Oops. Where am I? Wrong one. Let me come back to my article. There we go. So let's continue on. Collaboration denied. Briefing notes prepared in May 2022 for Air Marshal Chipman's Senate estimates hearing. It was actually, so Air Marshal, Chief of Air Force Air Marshal Robert Chipman, he didn't take that position officially until July of 2022. So his predecessor was Air Marshal Mel Hupfield, who answered questions before Senate estimates in October 2021. Senator Peter Whish-Wilson asked him some questions, and he then handed the reins over to Air Marshal Chipman on the 1st of July 2022. So briefing notes prepared in May 2022 for Air Marshal Chipman's Senate estimates hearing also state that neither the US nor any other nation or ally had requested or offered to collaborate on the issue of UAPs. Defense has no desire to seek collaboration on the issue of UAPs. Defense has no. The Department of Defense has. The Department of Defense refused to answer questions from the Canberra Times. So, why is that important? So, if we come now to the document that Jamison Murphy is referencing, the briefing notes, this was a document that I was able to secure through the Australian Freedom of Information Act, and it is a briefing document on UAP for the Chief of Air Force. So because in October 2021, Mel Hupfield was kind of taken by surprise on Senator Whish-Wilson's lines of questioning on UAP, and I haven't played that clip for you because it's not really relevant to what we're talking about this evening. But because Mel Hupfield was so, taken by surprise on the line of questioning, there was a formal briefing document, a formal briefing paper put together so that when the next Senate estimates came round, or future Senate estimates that say Air Marshal Robert Chipman was going to be attending following taking the reins from the 1st of July of 2022, he would have some talking points ready to go. So we had a script. We would have a script that he could follow. And so what's important, again, in this document, you can see there is a table of contents offered as an ally. Have the United States offered to or asked to collaborate on UAP investigations? And in this document, which is current as of the 26th of May, 2022, and we know the UAPTF had these discussions via email correspondence with the Five Eyes, including Australia, Canada, and the UK, in December 2021. So in May of 2022, you have the Australian Department of Defense in this Chief of Air Force brief saying, no, the United States nor any other nation or ally have requested or offered to collaborate on UAP reporting or investigation. That is completely false. And we know that now thanks to the FOIA documents that have been released, and we're going to review those. Defense has no desire to seek collaboration on this issue, yet it's collaborating with the United States, as evident by these emails that you're going to see momentarily, and then Jamieson is reporting on. So there's either deception being played, or there is a complete lack of intelligence sharing if the Royal Australian Air Force is being kept completely in the dark with maybe discussions that the defense intelligence services are having with the United States, and they're not sharing any of that info, or there's a complete degree of incompetence being played by the Chief of Air Force and those that support the work of the Chief of Air Force, not asking the right questions and asking the right questions to the right people, or there is something more nefarious being played, and that is the possibility of the Chief of Air Force exercising plausible deniability. It could be any one of those options. It could be a combination of those options. So let's continue on now. We'll go back to the article and we'll continue on. Now, what is frustrating is that Jamieson, following his review of these FOIA documents and obviously his history reporting on the UAP topic in Australian context, it's pretty disgraceful that the Department of Defense refused to even acknowledge the questions that he was asking on a pretty critical issue. If an Australian senator, if a sitting Australian senator is not being given answers from leadership in defense, the Royal Australian Air Force Chief of Air Force, what confidence? So if Senator Whish-Wilson is not receiving factual and truthful responses from those in leadership, well, what confidence do we, and I as a taxpayer, what confidence that we have that those that represent us and our interests, so Senator Whish-Wilson, again, what confidence does he have that his questions that he poses to those in positions of leadership and authority in government and defense are going to be answered truthfully, accurately, and factually going forward? I would say after all of this debacle that has been exposed, we as taxpayers should have very little confidence in those in positions of leadership in defense, and Australian senators should have very little confidence in those in positions of defense, leadership in defense, that answers the questions they ask are going to be answered truthfully and accurately. And this is not the first time this has happened. This is, the first time is a mistake, the second time is a choice, and the third time it happens is a habit. So this is now the second instance where we've had the Australian Department of Defence not providing accurate, factual, and truthful information to a sitting Australian senator regarding the UAP topic. So there is this element here that there is a complete lack of transparency by the Australian Department of Defence when it comes to this topic. And you'll see that in just a moment. I was privileged, I was honoured to be able to provide some commentary in this article. I have a relationship with Jamieson Murphy, so I was pleased that I was able to contribute in getting this reporting out. Grant Levac, an Australian civilian UAP researcher, said the lack of transparency was quite concerning. The Chief of Air Force leads all discussions on UAP in Australia, so if there's one person that needs to know what is happening on this topic in an Australian context and our discussions with allies, it's him, Mr. Levac said. He is either uninformed because there is a complete lack of intelligence sharing, or there's a degree of incompetence, or it's something more sinister like plausible deniability. Any one of those scenarios is quite concerning. And I've kind of just reiterated that before I even read that quote to you. So it is a huge concern if the Australian Department of Defence is not being honest about a topic that it really has shown absolutely no interest in publicly. Well, again, what confidence do we have that other more important issues or equally important issues, because we know the UAP issue is a potential national security threat and safety of flight issue, what confidence do we have that other important issues that Australians care about are going to be addressed in an accurate fashion. I have very little confidence going forward that we're ever going to get any completely truthful and accurate information from those in positions of leadership in defense, which is incredibly frustrating. And so then it goes on to say, questions raised. It's not the first time the Australian Defence Force has misled senators about the nation's UAP activities. In 2024, defence officials admitted Australia sent representatives to a UAP briefing. It was actually, it was reported in 2024, but it was actually in late 2023 that I discovered through a response that the Australian Department of Defence gave to a question on notice at Senator Whish-Wilson. It revealed in that response in December of 2023 that Australia did actually have a representative at AARO's inaugural Five Eyes UAP Caucus Working Group meeting, which took place in May 2023. So, but it was reported on by Jamieson in early 2024. Defence officials admitted Australia sent representatives to a UAP briefing in the Pentagon after vigorously denying any involvement. So again, what is that all talking about? If you're kind of new to the party and you haven't been following, all of this information that I've been covering for months now on the show, we'll go back to May 31st of 2023. We're at NASA's public meeting with the UAP Independent Study Team, then Director of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, revealed this to the world.
Time for one last question.
Sean, you recommended foreign partnership with NASA. I'm curious, especially given your MAT, have you, as AARO, partnered with international agencies, and is there ways for reporting to yours?
Mm-hmm. So that's a great question. I want to expound on that just a little bit. So I have just held our first Five Eyes forum on this subject last week, I think it was, or earlier this week. I don't know. Dan was there, and we have, we've entered into discussions with our partners on data sharing. How do they do reporting? What kind of analysis can they help us with? What kind of calibration can they help us with? What can we help them with? And we're establishing all of that right now. And they're going to end up, sending their information and data to us to feed into the process that we've laid out for how we're going to do all of this. Beyond that, I have not had either the time or the bandwidth to do, and that's why I would look to NASA to expand the scientific and academic relationships that they have across all of our allies and partners on how can we bring them into the fold. That's where I think there's a lot of benefit to NASA taking lead on that.
Great. Thank you. One just clarifications for people who don't know, what are the Five Eyes?
Oh, I'm sorry. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Five Eyes, those are that's the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. So those are the 5 partners.
Terrific. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that was Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick in May 2023, revealing to the world that AARO had held its first Five Eyes forum on UAP. So following that revelation, Senator Whish-Wilson submitted a question on notice to the Department of Defense, asking, and this is kind of proving, this is showing you documentary evidence that backs up everything that Jamieson Murphy is reporting on. So you don't just have to take his word for it. You can actually see the documentation that has informed his reporting. So question that Senator Whish-Wilson asked, did Australia attend the recent Five Eyes meeting held in May 2023? If so, did it attend the US briefing on UAPs? Now, he asked that question in, when was it? June, on the 20th of June, 2023. And so he got a response the following month Australia did not attend a United States briefing on UAPs, which got us all shocked, thinking, well, why the hell would Australia not attend a Five Eyes briefing on a potential national security issue and safety of flight risk? Well, it turns out that information was completely false. It was either a lie or it was just, it was completely inaccurate due to someone not finding the right information. Because on the 2nd of November, 2023, Senator Whish-Wilson didn't stop there. He continued to ask questions. He asked, did the Australian Department of Defence receive an invitation from the US All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, to attend the inaugural Five Eyes Forum on UAP in May 2023, led by AARO Director Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick? The response on the 15th of December from the Australian Department of Defence, yes, a defence representative of the Australian Embassy in Washington attended. So they're doing a complete 180 backflip. So this is now the first time that they've lied, or they're completely incompetent and not able to get the right information and ask the right people. And then now they've done it again with, Air Marshal Robert Chipman having absolutely no awareness whatsoever that Australia has been engaged in discussions with the US on UAP dating back to December of 2021. And he testified on 2 occasions, November 2022 and February 2023, that Australia had no discussions or engagement with the United States. So that, again, just showing you the documentary evidence that has gone in to inform Jamison Murphy's reporting here. So let's continue on. The agenda of the meeting, so again, we're talking about AARO's Five Eyes Forum on UAP. The agenda of the meeting, which is attended by members of the Five Eyes Alliance, was later released by the US government. Now, it was actually released thanks to FOIA. And we know it was released through FOIA because I was the one that was able to secure it for release. And so if I show you, let's see where I'm going to pull this in for you. You know what? Yeah, we'll keep reading on and then I'll show you. So the agenda document that was secured for release through FOIA shows the alliance, which includes the US, UK, Canada, New Zealand, met, and obviously us, Australia, met for a caucus working group to cultivate shared awareness of allies' UAP issues, detection and mitigation activities and challenges. Again, reiterating all of those things that you just saw Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick talk about in his revelation at that NASA public meeting with the UAP independent study team. They, the Five Eyes, discussed the need for networks to share Five Eyes UAP reporting, including documents marked top secret and special intelligence, along with UAP collection planning. The intention is to develop a framework for future UAP collaboration, one document said. So what is the document that Jamison Murphy is referring to? Well, again, it's the document that I was able to secure for release through FOIA. And what is very interesting in this agenda document, so it was officially called the Five Eyes Inaugural UAP Caucus Working Group Meeting. And a lot of you that have followed this channel will have seen this before, but what do we see is on the agenda? Five Eyes partner updates, and who's first cab off the rank? Australia. So there's an expectation at this working group meeting for Australia to provide commentary on Australia's efforts to collect data, intelligence on UAP and share that with Five Eyes partners at this Five Eyes UAP Caucus Working Group meeting. Now, again, we don't know, unfortunately, what Australia had to contribute, what the defence representative that attended AARO's Five Eyes UAP Caucus Working Group meeting had to contribute at that meeting. But thanks to a document that Steve Tay was able to secure for release through Canada's equivalent of FOIA, we know that the updates that Australia, the UK, and New Zealand offered at this caucus working group meeting was very, very brief. So there wasn't a whole lot, at least in Canada's view, in the report that they put out following their attendance at this briefing. There wasn't a whole lot that Australia, the UK, and New Zealand had to contribute at that briefing, and that kind of makes sense for Australia, considering that the Australian Royal Australian Air Force, Australian Department of Defence has had no interest in the UAP topic since 1996, where they basically just wiped their hands and said, move along, folks, nothing to see here. We can't find any scientific or other compelling reason to continue to devote resources to the ongoing investigation of UAP, because the Royal Australian Air Force had a very long history of investigating UAP, or what it referred to as unusual aerial sightings, UAS, dating back to the 50s, the early 50s. A lot of people don't know that Australia has almost as long as a history investigating the UAP UFO topic as the United States does. But it washed its hands of it all in 1996, and it hasn't touched the topic since. And it hasn't even conducted a formal review of its current position on UAP, despite everything we know that's come out of the US, and despite how seriously the US is now taking this topic. Incredibly frustrating for those of us that take this topic seriously and simply want our government to acknowledge that the UAP topic is one that's worthy of serious consideration and scrutiny. And we want our government to investigate. We want to know what UAP are, what can be attributed to UAP. So that was just showing you again some of the documentation that went into the formulation of Jamison Murphy's reporting. Let's come back to the article again, and we're getting close to the end here. Policy out of step. Now, let me just make sure I'm at the right point here. Yeah, okay, so let's continue on. So policy out of step. Australia's UAP policy has previously been criticised for being out of step with its closest military allies, including the US, which introduced mandatory UAP reporting for defence personnel in 2021. The US considers UAPs a potential flight safety and national security risk, while other allies have acknowledged the unknown aerial phenomenon, including the UK, Canada, France, and Spain. We know Canada is taking it more seriously than any of the other Five Eyes. You know, it's not following the US completely, but at least it's made some the chief scientist for Canadian government has made some recommendations for the government to consider to implement a formal investigatory body on UAP. And we know now that another ally of Australia's, Japan, ally of the United States as well, is putting forward recommendations that a formal UAP investigatory body comparable to AARO be introduced. Issue mock. The Canberra Times has previously reported Australian defence personnel don't feel comfortable reporting UAP sightings through official channels, and Freedom of Information documents revealed senior defence officials mocked the subject while preparing briefing notes. The Australian Defence Force stopped collecting reports of UAPs in 1996 after determining there was no scientific or other compelling reason to continue to devote resources to the recording and investigation of UAP. So this article really provides a nice summary of Australia sitting on its fat ass and not doing anything on the topic. The Australian Department of Defence and the Royal Australian Air Force is sitting on its hands. It's got its head buried in the sand. It is not being transparent with the Australian public and Australian taxpayers and those that we elect into positions of authority and leadership in government. Senator Whish-Wilson now on 2 occasions has been provided with false, inaccurate information, either intentionally, either inadvertently, which speaks to incompetence at the Department of Defence level, or the Chief of Air Force is being denied access to information that he has a rightful need to know, because he is the one that is answering questions before senators in a Senate estimates. So kudos again to Jamison Murphy for reporting on this. I'm surprised that not more outlets are covering it. I'm going to try and do some outreach to the legacy news media, the 7, 9, 10, the news networks, to see if they'll pick up on it. I doubt they will, because they too, like the Australian Department of Defence and government, sit on their fat ass when it comes to this topic, and they only report on stuff when it suits them for clicks and views, and they'll happily play the X-Files music over the top of their segment. So again, very, very frustrating that there is a lack of uptake in the legacy news media on Australia's lack of engagement and and interest in a topic that should be taken seriously from a national security threat and safety of flight risk perspective. So that's the article, folks. Now, after this article came out, I reached out to Sue Goff and asked her, this is on the 1st of June, I reached out and said, I hope this email's fine you well. New reporting from the Canberra Times in Australia today, this was on Sunday when the article was released, confirmed that UAP Task Force, led by then UAP Director Brendan McKernan, had scheduled a briefing with Five Eyes partners to occur on 15th of December 2021, with Canada, Australia, and the UK all providing acceptances, but was rescheduled for early 2022. And then I linked the article. On consideration of the new reporting, could you kindly provide comment by way of response to the following? 1, what was the purpose of the UAPTF's briefing to Five Eyes partners in early 2022? 2, how was the UAPF briefing with Five Eyes partners conducted? Was it in-person teleconference or video conference? Because, COVID was still a thing back then. Did the UAPTF provide any additional briefings to Five Eyes partners prior to being superseded by the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, in July 2022? So that was my email that I sent on Sunday. Now, I was really pleased to see that some other podcasters have been picking up on this story. So kudos to, if I just pull up the old slide deck again. There we go. So I can show this on screen for you. Kudos to Andy McGrillen over that UAP podcast. He covered this breaking reporting in his monthly breakdown that he runs on his YouTube channel. I've linked that show in the description below, so if you do want to check it out, feel free. But this is basically what Andy and his guest Nathan had to say regarding this reporting that had come out, and obviously they were nice enough to recognize the efforts that I did to try and get this information out as well. So this is from the breakdown with Andy McGrillen and Nathan in the days after this reporting.
Who's been a guest on the podcast before, does some wonderful work from the UFO scene, especially in Australia. He had a post out, breaking news: Five Eyes were engaged in discussions with the UAP Task Force in 2021. Essentially, the statement read that new documents released through FOIA reveal that Five Eyes partners, Canada, Australia, and the UK, were scheduled to be briefed by the UAP Task Force on the 15th of December 2021. What's interesting about this, and especially from that Australian side of things, folks, was the former Australian Chief of Air Force and now Vice Chief of Defence, Air Marshal Robert Chipman, previously testified before Senate in both November 2022 and February 2023 that Australia had not been in discussions with the US on UAPs, and released emails now suggest otherwise. For me, there's not a lot to talk about there, but it's just a fact for me that the UK, the US, Canada, Germany, France, all these countries seem to take a real not just a back step, but several back steps, and hide in this. We do a full Homer Simpson into the hedge when it comes to the UFO topic here. Another Simpsons reference in this one, folks, sorry. But yeah, and we really do just let the US lead on this. It seems to be they get a briefing and it kind of disappears from there. So again, over to the United States to lead the way, Nathan.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really grateful for the work that Grant does. He seems to be doggedly pursuing this, and I really appreciate that. And a shout out to the other folks who are really submitting all the FOIA requests and trying to get as much information as they can about what's truly taking place. But I think it speaks to the fact that you're right, nobody wants to stick their necks out ahead of the U.S., that there are, in fact, conversations that do take place with these agencies sort of behind the scenes. And keep in mind that the size scope of these governments, they're large, and they can have smaller organizations within those governments that are doing things, and maybe the high level spokespeople aren't aware that those conversations are truly taking place, or if they are, maybe there's a little bit of misdirection there or semantics, like we didn't talk to the US, but we did talk to this contractor who works on the UAP task force. It could be something of that nature. So hope Grant continues to go after that, and we get some further revelations from that discovery.
Yeah, I think everyone will know John Greenwald from the Black Vault and all the work he does when it comes to FOIA. But for the love of God, John Greenwald will say himself he has thousands of FOIA requests in at any one time. We know FOIA requests can be rejected, refused, turn up nothing, and then you put in something again and it comes up mysteriously. So the more people, the merrier who can do that and do that process well. So fair play to Grant, who's really grabbed the bull by the horn, or the kangaroo by the ears out there in Australia. So yeah, well done, Grant. Keep that up.
So obviously very nice of Andy and Nathan to show their support, and I really appreciate their kind words. But this was a team effort, because you'll notice Nathan Andy there referenced John Greenwald, and it was actually John Greenwald who secured these emails through the US Freedom of Information Act. It wasn't me, it was John. That was kept on the down low until this reporting had been, this story had broken from Jamison Murphy. So I was able to collaborate with John on getting this information out and getting it reported on. And so John was able to release these documents, and there was a reason why the documents came after the story. His tweet was, newly released Navy emails reveal Five Eyes coordination on UAP's internal coordination and a redaction mishap that exposed names the government meant to withhold, although the Black Vault applied the redactions for them. Here's the full story. So credit to John, and he must, I applaud his efforts there to redact information that the FOIA case officer failed to redact. Obviously, John, we have no interest in doxing anyone that does obviously good work for their respective governments. So there's no need to out anyone unnecessarily if they haven't done anything that is nefarious or illegal. So credit to John there, but it was a huge mishap by the FOIA case officer. It looks like the email chain was provided in an unredacted format, or either complete or partial, and so revealing obviously some personal identifying information and information that would typically be redacted due to FOIA exemptions for privacy reasons and so on. So again, credit to John and respect to him for doing the right thing. He obviously has a great degree of integrity that I really admire and appreciate in John. So let's now have a look at the article, if I've got it. Where is it? Here. So John put together an article on the Black Vault. If I just play this, let me just make sure I've got it on screen. There we go. So this is on, I've linked this in the show notes below. John puts an accompanying article out when he ever releases something of significance. So this was on the 3rd of June, 2 days ago. Newly released Navy emails reveal UAP coordination, Five Eyes briefing, and forgotten redactions. In a newly released batch of internal US Navy emails obtained by the Black Vault through a Freedom of Information Act FOIA request filed in January 2022, shows you how long it takes for these damn FOIA requests to get responded to. 3 years, 3+ years for this to be filled. Another behind-the-scenes view has emerged of official discussions on unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, intelligence coordination, and internal task force efforts to process incoming sightings, including those originating from civilian sources such as the FAA. The FOIA request targeted emails to and from Yasser Qureshi, identified through sources and publicly available linked information as a Navy program manager who was involved in the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, UAPTF, led by Jay Stratton and later Brendan McKernan. As of December 2024, Qureshi now appears to be at the office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security. This is solely using open source information that is publicly available via LinkedIn, suggesting possible current involvement in the successor entity, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, though this has not been confirmed. It does state Deputy Director H&SA as his current position, also publicly available on LinkedIn, but it's unclear exactly what H&SA is in this context. Although the names were redacted throughout the release under the FOIA exemption B6, the Navy mistakenly failed to apply those redactions correctly, inadvertently revealing, it shows you that FOIA case officers aren't perfect, inadvertently revealing email addresses, phone numbers, and also Qureshi's identity in certain parts of the file upon release. The Black Vault chose to reapply those redactions as originally intended by the Navy to protect privacy and as a courtesy to the US Navy. The right thing to do, in my opinion. Although the Black Vault was going to withhold Qureshi's name from publication once documents were released and published, a decision was made to publish Qureshi's name in this since it was used in the official FOIA response letter by the Navy, which becomes a matter of public record, and this case will be listed in the Navy's FOIA case log. FAA sightings. So some of these emails don't pertain to what we're talking about here, Five Eyes discussions with the UAPTF. So I won't go through some of the emails correspondence which has references FAA reporting. So you can read this at your leisure if you wish. So I'm just going to bypass the stuff that's not relevant to what we're talking about, but then it does become relevant. Five Eyes briefings and AARO transition. These newly released Navy emails also confirm high-level UAP coordination between the US and its Five Eyes allies, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. On December 8th, 2021, members of the UAP Task Force, including its director, were scheduled to meet with international counterparts for a classified discussion on unidentified aerial phenomena. And this is, again, you've kind of seen these quotes that were included in Jamison Murphy's article for the Canberra Times. Read tomorrow's UAP briefing. I received confirmation from Australia and Canada they will be there, and of course the UK, one US official wrote. The meeting, however, was ultimately rescheduled due to a last-minute calendar conflict. That decision prompted frustration from officials within the Office of the Under-Secretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security. I have to say I'm a bit disappointed this did not happen, wrote a US official who encouraged partners to reserve time. A UAPTF counterpart responded, "The last thing we want to do is be dismissive of our allies and their time." But later meetings between the Five Eyes did indeed take place and were confirmed through US documents also released under the FOIA to Australian Research Grant Levac, which listed a Five Eyes caucus working group with an explicit goal to cultivate shared awareness of allies' UAP issues, detection, mitigation activities, and challenges. The agenda included discussions of networks to share Five Eyes UAP reporting. So again, consistent, obviously, with the Canberra Times reporting. The newly released emails contradict, and what he was referring to there was AARO's Five Eyes inaugural UAP caucus working group meeting that took place on the 24th of May, 2023. The newly released emails contradict multiple public statements previously made by Australia's top military leadership, as recently highlighted by the Canberra Times. Air Marshal Robert Chipman, the then Chief of Air Force and now Vice Chief of Defence, second in command for the Australian Defence Force, twice denied that Australia had been briefed by the United States on UAPs. "I'm not aware of any formal discussions that we've had with the US," he told Parliament in 2022. When asked again in 2023 if any Australian defence attachés had received UAPTF briefings, Chipman replied flatly, "No." The Canberra Times article, authored by Jamison Murphy, credited independent UAP researcher Levac for identifying the significance of the emails and exposing the contradiction. Levac called the lack of transparency quite concerning, adding, "The Chief of Air Force leads all discussions on UAP in Australia, so if there's one person that needs to know what is happening on this topic in Australian context and our discussions with allies, it's him." According to Levac, there are only three explanations: either uninformed because there is a complete lack of intelligence sharing, or there's a degree of incompetence, or it's something more sinister like plausible deniability. Any one of those three scenarios is concerning. And again, that was all included in the Canberra Times reporting. The email release also occurred in the final weeks before the formal establishment of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, the successor to the UAPTF. On November 23, 2021, Deputy Secretary of Defence Kathleen Hicks issued a directive for OUSD and INS to take over the UAPTF's responsibilities and create a permanent structure. Her memorandum included in the FOIA release emphasized the need to synchronize UAP data collection and analysis across the military and intelligence community and to collaborate with non-DoD partners, including foreign allies. The documents confirm that international UAP cooperation was already underway, and they raised questions about why those efforts were denied in official forums. As the Canberra Times noted, the Department of Defence declined to answer when asked whether Australia had attended the Five Eyes briefing. Contracting, budget questions, transition, that's not relevant to us. So that's where John's summary ends. So again, he did a great job to really very consistent again with what Jamison Murphy had reported. So let's actually now have a look at the emails in question. Now, some of you may have read this already, so apologies if this is a little on the repetitive side, but I do want to show you these emails. So this is obviously the letter that the Department of Navy provided to John, and this is all public information on the Black Vault, so John's not doxing himself here. This is obviously the response letter that he received. John had originally requested a copy. This was John's original request. I request copy of records, electronic or otherwise, of all emails sent to and or from and or CC'd and or BCC'd Yasser Qureshi, Program Manager at US Navy, Springfield, Virginia, which contains the following keywords, phrases: unidentified aerial and or UAP and or UAPTF and or UAP and or UFO and or unidentified flying object and or AOIMSG, which was after the UAPTF, it became a transitional thing to the AMIOSG, AMSOG, and then it became obviously AARO and or aerial object. I ask that you include all attachments discovered in these emails. I ask that you include all dates to be researched. The nice thing about reading these response letters that John gets is that, you know, if John doesn't necessarily reveal to you how he's drafted or how he's crafted his request, you know, I've actually read these response letters a couple of times and thought that's actually a nice way to, you know, nice language to include a request. I've actually learned quite a bit from just seeing how John has crafted his requests just from the response documents he gets. So let's jump down to, I'm going to show you the first, this is the one. So, and I've highlighted just for frame of reference so you can see some key information. So again, John's done the right thing. He has redacted all of the information that the FOIA case officer intended to redact. So Monday, the 29th of November, 2021, subject line, UAPTF intro, unclassified team. FYI, this has been moved to Wednesday, 9:30, just after large group. So that obviously suggests that there was a briefing tentatively scheduled for the 1st of December of 2021. Now, what's interesting in this recipient list, FN, which I suspect is for foreign national, OUSDINS, so Office of Undersecretary for Defense Intelligence and Security, but look at that, in brackets, AUS. So the defense representative that is in this email chain is utilizing a US-issued email address. Why is that? Is that to circumvent FOIA on the Australian side, or is that common practice? And you'll notice it's also true of someone on the Canadian side. So this is clearly an email that has been sent to more than 3 members of the Five Eyes. It incorporates Australia, Canada, and the US. We don't know about the UK and New Zealand from what we can see on the recipient list, but very interesting that there are Australian and Canadian defense representatives that are utilizing US-issued email accounts for correspondence with their counterparts on the US side. So that was on the 29th of November. Let's come up to the response the next day, 30th of November. Again, we can see our good mate down under. We don't know who that is in this redacted email, but we know they've been included in this response from someone who is the chief of Commonwealth, the Commonwealth engagement team. So someone that obviously coordinates, you know, and corresponds with, you know, allies of the United States across the Commonwealth, and those are the Five Eyes: UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Again, response to that email UAPTF intro. I left a couple of voice messages and wanted to follow up with this email. Unfortunately, tomorrow's meeting, so again, there was a meeting scheduled for the 1st of December. Tomorrow's meeting calendar has had some late changes to today, and we no longer have availability for a 9:30 meeting. I propose that we schedule to Wednesday, the 8th of December. Do you, everyone in this email, have availability at 10 a.m. on 8th of December? Response to that email, the same day. So it was sent 3:16, sent 3:32. We don't know who the sender is, but again, our good mate from the Defence in Australia is included on the email. Same subject heading. Thanks for the note. No worries. Let's tentatively plan for next week. I'll get with the director, who we know at this time that the UAPTF was led by Brendan McKernan, and let him know. We come up to a response later that day, about half an hour later. Again, our good mate from Australia is in the recipient list. Thank you again. My apologies for having to reschedule. So obviously there some scheduling conflicts, as Jamison and John have reported on. Fast forward to Thursday, December the 2nd, the day after the meeting was originally scheduled for, but it's now been pushed to the 8th. Again, our good mate from Australia is in the email recipient list. I just want to confirm that the Navy is all set for Wednesday, 8th December at 10 a.m. It will be myself and 2 others from the task force, including the director. So Brendan McKernan and whoever this guy is, and 1 other. Please confirm if it's still good on your end. Where do we go from there? So that is an email chain with the subject heading of UAPTF intro. So let's now have a look at where we go. Now, the 8th of December meeting didn't go ahead, so it didn't happen. So then on the 14th of December, now there's our good mate from Australia is no longer included in this email chain, but there is now an email with the subject heading of tomorrow, 10 a.m., being that would be the 15th of December. Make sure I've got, read tomorrow's UAP briefing. I received confirmation from Australia and Canada they will be there, and of course UK. So we know, again, thanks to the reporting of Jamison Murphy and also by John Greenwald, that there was a briefing scheduled between Australia, Canada, and the UK and the UAPTF, the US, on the 15th of December in 2021. The response, so that was 12:59 p.m., a couple hours later. Thanks for the note. I have a conflicting meeting at 9:30. However, I will defer to someone and someone else from the task force, CC'd, if they would like to meet their counterparts tomorrow. Response later that afternoon. Okay, thanks. Name redacted. Please do let me know. I recall last week you did want to keep the meeting. I don't know. There will be another opportunity after tomorrow this month. And then we fast forward to the following day, 15th, when the meeting was supposed to take place about 4 hours earlier, 5 hours earlier at 10 a.m. This guy sounds pretty pissed. I have to say, I'm a bit disappointed this did not happen. As a reminder, I provided an opportunity for you and your team to waive off on a briefing today for the other partners until after the holidays. I recall you and your team said last week that you wanted to come in today to brief the other partners. Now, coming today, that suggests to me it's at the Pentagon, to brief the other partners. Because of this, I urged the partners to build time into their schedules and come in for the brief. At this point, if your team still wants to meet with the other Five Eyes partners, I suggest you contact me in the new year for another date and time. So the chief of the Commonwealth engagement team is getting a little bit short with the folks at the UAP Task Force, because they couldn't organize a piss up in a brewery and get their act together and meet with the Five Eyes when they had scheduled to do so. So, and then you have a response, saying, a couple hours after, redacted, sorry for any misunderstanding that occurred between the end of last week's meeting. So there was a meeting the previous week on the 8th Now, who was involved in that? We have no idea. Last week's meeting with unexpectedly reduced turnout. What does that mean? Who attended that meeting if there was one? Was that with any of the Five Eyes partners? Where's New Zealand? Were they scheduled for a separate meeting? Who knows? Meeting with unexpectedly reduced turnout and this week's rescheduling. I was engaged with congressional engagements and related actions earlier this week. We definitely would like to continue this conversation with the partners. In other words, we want to collaborate with our partners. And remember that Chief of Air Force brief document that I showed you from May of 2022. We have not had any, what was it again? Let me see if I'll go exactly back to it so you can see this is how wrong the lack of transparency to date. So let me pull up, make sure I've got the right document here. Where is it? There we go. So again, remember this document I showed you before? No, the United States nor any other nation or ally have requested or offered to collaborate on UAP reporting or investigation. Defense has no desire to seek collaboration. Well, that's complete BS because we've just seen this email chain. We've now seen the documentary evidence that shows that the US is keen to collaborate with its Five Eyes partners and has reached out to them. We definitely would like to continue this conversation with the partners and now have an obligation to do so for multiple reasons. Can we defer until January? Please do pass along our regrets to the partners and express our appreciation for their time and cooperation. From the Deputy Director in Executive Intelligence Support, SIO Special Programs, Don, Department of Navy CAPCO, OpNav N2, N6, Naval Intelligence Activity. We don't know who this is, but if you've read any of the other reporting that John Greenwald has done, there is suspicion that this individual is the UAP Task Force Director, Brendan McKernan. And you can have a look at some of the past articles that John has done on that regarding Don Capco. So that there's a strong indication that that may be the UAP Task Force Director at the time, Brendan McKernan. Tuesday the 16th. So this is, again, day after this meeting was supposed to go down, but it didn't happen. Again, our Australian mates know what is seen in this email. Obviously, for good reason, it's gripes between the UAP Task Force and the OUSD INS. Let me add to Redacted's comments, but again, we can make an assumption that that might be, let me add to Brendan's comments. I know we had talked about syncing up this week, but I hadn't received confirmation that this was a go until Tuesday afternoon. We'll do a better job communicating to ensure we lock in future dates times after the new year. The last thing we want to do is to be dismissive of our allies and their time. Now that we have a statutory responsibility to engage more robustly on this per the NDAA, I anticipate a lot more visibility, interaction, and interest at the senior level. We'll reach out to you and your team after the new year. And that was the last of that email chain. So we can take away safely, you can deduce from this email chain that there was a briefing that was scheduled to take place in early 2022. We don't have any information about that at the moment. But again, if you go off the statements from Scott Bray before his congressional testimony in May 2022, we've brought a number of allies in discussions on UAP. You've got Ross Coulthard's reporting the day prior to Senator Whish-Wilson asking the then Chief of Air Force Air Marshal Air Marshal Robert Chipman, did Australia have any briefings or discussions? No briefings at all. No. So you have all of this documentary evidence now and corroborative evidence from other sources, Scott Bray, Ross Coulthard, proving unequivocally that the individual that is in the position of leadership in the Australian Defence Force that should be taking this topic seriously and should know what the hell is going on with relation to discussions between Australia and the United States and other Five Eyes partners on the topic of UAP, discussing the potential national security threats and safety of flight risks, is the Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Robert Chipman, and he has absolutely no fucking idea what is going on. What a disgrace. If he is not the one that is provided with the information that he should be provided with, then why the hell is he leading all UAP discussions in an Australian context? Get whichever department was responsible for being represented at the UAPTF's Five Eyes briefing, which we assume was in early 2022, and the organization that had the defense representative attend AARO's Five Eyes UAP Caucus Working Group meeting in May 2023. Why is the head of that organization, if it's say the Defense Intelligence Organization, why is someone that's heading up that organization not the one sitting before Senate estimates answering these questions that are asked by a sitting senator? It's clear that Robert Chipman has no idea what is going on, so he should not be the one that's responsible for leading discussions on UAP in Australian context. It needs to be someone else, because clearly he's been left out of the loop. He's been kept in the dark, either intentionally, inadvertently, or there is something, again, more nefarious at play in that there's plausible deniability. I don't know what the reason is, or are they lying through their teeth intentionally or inadvertently, or is someone lying to Robert Chipman? They're all possibilities that we need to entertain. And those are questions that the Australian legacy media needs to ask the Australian Department of Defence. It can't just sit with, Senator Peter Whish-Wilson. Other senators need to get off their fat ass and start asking questions, but the Australian legacy news media needs to do it as well. And that's where I've been increasingly frustrated over time, is that the lack of due diligence and interest from the news media on this issue. Thank the stars that we've got someone like Jamison Murphy that's able to report on this and do it with integrity and respectfully and get the information. He's being more transparent with his reporting than the Australian Department of Defence is. That's not how it should work. It should be, we're the taxpayers. They work for us. They should be transparent on this issue. If there's really nothing to it, if UAP is a nothing burger, move along, folks, nothing to see here. Why are they being so cagey about it? Why are they being so lackluster in their transparency? And that leads us nicely into, so after obviously John released the documents, the emails on the Black Vault, I again reached out to Sue Goff with a follow-up question. I said, this was on, when was this? The other day. Hi, Sue. Hope this follow-up finds you well. And I included the link to John's document drop on the Black Vault. As the FOIA documents in question have now been released via the Black Vault, referred link above, could you kindly provide comment by way of response to the following questions at your earliest convenience? And I reiterate those questions. This is what's incredibly frustrating, when it's like trying to get blood from a stone sometimes when you ask questions of the Pentagon spokesperson, the Sue Goff. If it has potential, if it has the potential to cause embarrassment to the US Department of Defense, the UAPTF, AARO, they simply won't comment. They will pick and choose. Sue Goff will pick and choose when she wants to respond to an inquiry from the press or concerned citizens. And I think that's also a disgrace. I think she should be more transparent and answer, questions that, regardless of what the how bad it may look for the parties involved, that information should be disclosed to the American public and interested parties. So let me show you, and I know you guys have been very patient and asked a lot of questions and put some comments in. So let me show you now. Come back to the slide deck. So Ross Coulthard, who's just come back from contact in the desert, or I think he's on his way back from the US. I believe it was yesterday. So this is just a screen grab of a portion of his tweet. He put out a tweet calling out the former Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Robert Chipman, who's now the Vice Chief for Defense, the second in charge. And so let me show you what Ross's post was, because I think it's rather significant. Ross's post was, this was, again, this is when was the date? This was the 4th of June. So this is yesterday. So Ross writes, the Vice Chief of Australia's Defence Force, Air Marshal Robert Chipman, has categorically denied to Parliament that the ADF was ever briefed on UAPs by the US Department of Defence. That was an untrue statement, but perhaps he was misled by his staff. Someone has lied. I am told that in May 2023, an Australian Embassy DIO, Defence Intelligence Officer BT, I suspect that is the initials of the individual in question, who is a commander of the Royal Australian Navy, did attend a Washington DC AARO inaugural Five Eyes forum briefing on UAP. Now that's interesting. Why is, if the Royal Australian Air Force has typically led the charge on all things UAP in Australia, why is it a commander of the Royal Australian Navy that is attached to the Defence Intelligence Organisation that is attending AARO's Five Eyes inaugural UAP Caucus Working Group meeting and briefing AARO on Australia's efforts? That's I'm not too sure what's going on there. I hope Australia's DIO, Defence Intelligence Organisation, who, by the way, has a very long history of investigating the UAP subject in Australia. Prior to it being the DIO, it was the Joint Intelligence Organisation, the JIO, and we know that in 1971, Australian nuclear scientist Harry Turner authored his now famous minute paper, really going into great depth about what the US had done since Roswell through to whenever he published that paper in 1971 about the US's efforts and how there were efforts in the academic community in the United States to research anti-gravity. So, and that minute paper was authored under the banner, the letterhead of the Joint Intelligence Organization. Prior to that, it was the Joint Intelligence Bureau. So the JIB, then the JIO, now the DIO, has a long history of being involved in the UAP subject. I hope Australia's DIO did not lie to its Vice Chief, Parliament, and Senator Whish-Wilson, who's at Senator Surfer, because it knew DIO is excluded from FOIA. And I've talked about that repeatedly on this channel. The Defence Intelligence Organisation and really all of the intelligence services in Australia, they're all exempt from FOIA. So you get Nunn and Buckley's out of any of the intelligence services if you're a concerned citizen wanting to exercise your right to information and request records. They won't release them because they're exempt from FOIA. Ridiculous. Misleading Parliament is a serious contempt. The record needs to be corrected and the ADF, Australian Defence Force, must acknowledge the truth. For now, I'm not identifying the officer who is only doing his job, and very well, I'm told. As the Americans told me, why should anyone lie about this? And that's a very, very good point. Excellent work. FOIA work by John Greenwald, obviously, with myself, and Jamison Murphy, who also shows other plans for such a briefing early in 2021. And then obviously a link to the article bypassing the paywall. So some very, very interesting revelations there from Ross. We now know, according to Ross, that it was a representative of the Defence Intelligence Organisation who was a commander in the Royal Australian Navy who attended AARO's Five Eyes inaugural UAP Caucus Working Group meeting in May 2023. Now, we don't know if that individual is the same one that attended. Based on the information that you've seen, it's not, we have no information to suggest that individual that Ross is referring to attended the briefing in 2021. In fact, I think that's not the case at all. I think it was completely someone completely different. But again, great to see Ross put his 2 cents in there and add to it where he could. Now, building on that, we also had a great researcher who kind of works in the shadows, does a lot of good research, and one that I really respect, has done a lot of work brought a lot of good information to the forefront, which is actionable for, for FOIA requests and other info. So at TP Loft 2008, it's important to make some distinctions. The ADF, which is the Australian Defence Force, and the Defence Department, or the Australian Department of Defence, are not the same thing. They're two separate organisations. DIG, which is the Defence Intelligence Group, which of that, DIO, the Defence Intelligence Organisation, is a part of. DIO is part of the Defence Department, not the Australian Defence Force, which are the services: Navy, Air Force, Army, Defence Space Command. Defence head is SecDef, ADF head is CDF. So SecDef is Secretary of Defence, and ADF, Australian Defence Force head, is Chief of Defence Force. DIG, which incorporates the Defence Intelligence Organisation, answers to the Secretary of Defence, not the CDF. So the Secretary of the Department of Defence should be one that is asked some questions as well. So let me pull up the rest of this tweet that TP Loft 2008 put out, because I think it is worthy of just having a look at. So let me just pull this up on screen. Just going to pull this up. Here we go. So it's a bit of a thread, so let me pull this up for you. Hopefully that's now displaying, which it is. So TP Loft 2008 goes on to his initial post and says, was the officer in attendance? Now he's referencing the May 2023 AARO briefing. Was the officer in attendance specifically representing DIO, which is at the defense level, or Navy, which is ADF? If it was DIO, then the meeting will have remained within the domain of the Defence Intelligence Group and not the ADF, making it entirely plausible that the Chief of Defence Force Chief of Defence Force was not aware. Now, I'm not sure I entirely agree with that. I think that you would expect the intelligence services to be sharing information and intelligence with those that are heading up Air Force, Navy, Army, Defence Space Command, particularly as Chief of Air Force, or even the Chief of Air Force and the Chief of the Defence Force, but particularly Robert Chipman, the Chief of Air Force. He's the one that's tasked with leading all discussions on UAP before Senate estimates. So he's the one that needs to know. And we've seen, you've seen in previous episodes I've done on the Unexplained Rundown, where we looked at emails where the Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Robert Chipman, was actually requesting talking points from AARO's Five Eyes briefing in May 2023. He was not aware of what the takeaways were from that meeting, and he was asking for talking points so that if he was asked questions about it at Senate estimates, he would at least have some background information. So again, I've shown in previous episodes that there is a lack of intelligence sharing and information sharing from the defense intelligence services, because I suspect that it was, as Ross has reported there, this DIO representative that attended, commander of the Navy who was representing DIO, that attended AARO's Five Eyes Forum. I imagine one of the few ways to actually find out about this meeting, again, he's referring to AARO's, we're kind of jumping away from 2021 now, we were talking about AARO's Five Eyes briefing in 2023. One of the few ways to actually find out about this meeting would be to have a current cabinet minister or member direct this specific question to the defense minister in question time or Senate estimates, or as a separate question on notice, so that both the question and answer are on the record. Importantly, this will provide an entry point into an FOI request on the question. That's a very good point, and I've done that in the past, and any activity associated in compiling a response. So often, if a response is provided by the Australian Department of Defence to a question on notice, I can then go after correspondence and emails that helped inform the response that the Department of Defence provided to the Senator's question on notice. And obviously, just some great heads up and information that he always provides. So I always appreciate TP Loft 2008's perspective. He always provides some interesting commentary. So there you go, folks. I know we're an hour and a half in. I hope this deep dive has been of value. I think it's it's unquestionable now that the Royal Australian Air Force, Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Robert Chipman, during his tenure as Chief of Air Force, who was tasked with being the lead on all things UAP in Australian context, had absolutely no idea what was going on, either intentionally, either inadvertently. He was either being lied to, or he was lying himself, or he was exercising plausible deniability, or there is a complete lack of intelligence sharing, or there is just complete incompetence. Take your pick. It could be a number of those items on the menu. So I hope you found that of interest and value. Again, I always try and back up what I'm reporting on with documentary evidence. And I wanted you not just to rely on the reporting that was put out by Jamison Murphy, but show you the documentary evidence that went into all of that reporting. So hope that's been of interest. Before we get into the rundown, I do want to keep it under the 3 hours today. Good luck trying to do it, though. I do want to acknowledge some of the questions and comments that have come through. So Mark, earlier in the show, asked, why is our military lying to its own government? It's a good question. I mean, Ross is always the first to say, always suspect a screw up, rather than a conspiracy. Is that the case here? I don't know. It's happened twice now. So are they just simply incompetent and they're making these mistakes more than once? Or is it something more nefarious? Jasmine, someone's pants are on fire. Telekinetic, no desire to collaborate. So referring to that Chief of Air Force brief, no desire to collaborate in order identify unknowns potentially in our airspace. What a policy. Yeah, it's so frustrating that the Australian Department of Defence and Royal Australian Air Force just is, I mean, we're so, and I've said this so many times, Australia and the United States are the closest of allies, but we could not be further apart. There could not be a greater divide on both countries' interest in the UAP topic from a national security perspective and safety of flight risk. And I don't understand it, because Australia is always lockstep with the United States on so many defense initiatives, but we couldn't be bothered to take the UAP topic seriously, which, figure that one out. I honestly don't understand it. Yes, Jimmy raised a good point. Unknowns should be investigated. Don't think, oh, well, move along, folks, nothing to see here. Investigate it. Telekinetic, calling out the lack of transparency is a great step towards pushing Australian defence out of denial and into the modern era of at least acknowledgement. I completely agree. Again, I'm not doing this for shits and giggles to try and get my rocks off by embarrassing the Australian Department of Defence or the Chief of Air Force. I want them to take this topic seriously. And if you're not going to take it seriously, then I'm going to show the Australian tax-paying public how complicit you are in your lack of due diligence, how absolutely disgraceful you are in your efforts to take this topic seriously. And I'm going to call you out on all of the gaffes and errors that you make, and I'm not going to stop calling you out until you start taking this topic seriously. And I think we, as Australians that take this topic seriously, all we want is our government to acknowledge that the UAP topic is real, because our US ally across the pond has. We're not saying it's NHI. We're not saying it's interdimensional, future human. We have no idea. Could it be any of those things? Anything is possible. But at least get off your ass and acknowledge that UAP is real, investigate it, so we can at least reach some conclusion as to what it is that's operating with impunity in Australian airspace and airspace around the other parts of the world. Because what if it is a foreign adversary? What if it is a real safety of flight risk to commercial and civil aviation? Don't just bury your head in the sand and ignore the topic because, move along, folks, nothing to see here. We investigated the topic before, but we don't want to get back in the game, because then we have to admit that we still don't know what's in our skies. And then there's a perceived lack of public trust. who gives a flying shit? It's clearly obvious now that you guys are completely incompetent, and the fact that you're not getting off your ass to take this topic seriously just leads to more of these gaffes coming out, and you're not doing your job and making these repeated errors and omissions of the truth time and time again. So it's time that you get your head out of your ass, get your head out of the sand, and start following the lead of the United States and take this topic seriously. From, at a minimum, a national security and safety of flight perspective. You know, we're not asking for you to implement an investigatory body that takes reporting from the public. We just want you to represent and best serve the brave men and women at the front lines, you know, those that are in the Australian Defence Force that do see something that they can't readily reconcile or explain in Australian airspace, on the ground, or in the ocean. And they're too fearful to report it because of the fear of stigma and the lack of reporting mechanisms that exist. And the fact that you've shown time and time again that you're not going to be honest and transparent on the topic anyway. So it's an ongoing frustration. And I'm sure there is a lot that share that frustration with me. Jasmine, thank you as always, my friend. I am not by no means anywhere in John Greenwald's realm, but I certainly have been fortunate to learn quite a bit from him. And anyone can submit a FOIA request. You know, if you even if you just want to use ChatGPT or Grok to help you formulate a FOIA request, that's a good way to do it. If you're not sure where to start yourself, use AI to help you out. I've actually done that once or twice. And it produced mixed results, but you know, you can still, if you're not sure where to start, ask ChatGPT or Grok to help you compile a FOIA request. Marie, thank you. Absolutely, Grant. Good to see you doing a great job pursuing it. Thank you for your comments as always. Thank you, Jimmy, as always, for your kind words. Teleconnect goes on to say, yeah, it was cool to see Annie and Nathan give a shout out from across the pond in the UK, and great work, Grant, collaborating with John Greenwald in the US. You are our five eyes. Certainly, I do have frequent comms with John, and he's been very supportive of my efforts. I am incredibly gracious of his counsel that he's provided me and suggestions, and I'm really pleased that we've been able to collaborate on this one to get this information out. Mark, the only time our military will talk about UAPs is when it's given permission by the US military, not before. Yeah, I mean, Ross talks about that, and we'll come to Ross in just a moment. So kind of park that one because it's an interesting one. Let's see a couple of the comments. Ralphie joining from X as a fellow Aussie. I appreciate what you do on this topic. Thank you, Ralphie. Appreciate your kind words there. Short Order Cook One, great to see you, my friend. Thanks for joining. Always good to see you in the chat. Aussie Was, hi everyone. Sorry I'm late. No problem. You can always watch on demand, Aussie Was. But thanks for being here. Good to see you in the chat. See if there's any other comments. Few comments about carbs and other interesting topics being discussed in the chat. You guys are always so engaged and have these sidebar conversations. It's so cool to see. Marie, Richard Miles and Penny Wong should be briefed as well. Absolutely. And you know, Penny Wong, hopefully she's learned her lesson and is taking this topic a little bit more seriously than she's done before. Jimmy, grab a Penny Wong t-shirt, Marie. Yes, there is one in the Unexplained Rundown merch store if you're interested to get one. Mark, please get Ross back on the podcast, Grant. I would love to. I have not done interviews for quite some time because I probably like to over prepare, and it just is a lot of energy and effort to for me anyway to interview someone on the podcast. I would love to. I know I talked about it last year and I still haven't got my act together to get Bill Chalker on the podcast. He was on with Ross and Jeff Cruikshank in August of 2023, was it? Yep. So I've done only a small number of interviews to date. Most of the stuff I do is kind of research and reporting on that research, but I would definitely like to get back into interviewing some interesting folks in the Australian space. Well, that's pretty much all the comments that you've sent through, folks. So let us now continue on. Again, thank you, Short Order Cook, for your kind words. It could be. I don't think they want eyes on Australia and the UAP issue. Well, where we're gonna turn to next is an interesting expose on Australia's possible involvement in the UAP conversation. Aussie was, are we the United States ally, or are we their lapdog? Well, I do unfortunately think that if the US says jump, we say how high. We are very much attached at the hip to the US on defense and assets. I mean, we're about to spend $500 billion on these nuclear attack, Virginia-class nuclear attack submarines. So, we're certainly in lockstep with the US on so many defense things, but just not the UAP issue, and it just doesn't make sense. Bex, we're the US secret keepers, and the irony is, according to Ross Coulthart, the US is keeping our military in the dark, recruiting personnel and lying by omission about the operation at hand, being UAP. It's an interesting point. Some newcomers: Mystical, Rock Hounding, and Fossils. Hi, good day. Good to see you. Thank you for joining. Aaron, always good to see you as well. Hopefully disclosure will come from the private sector, the likes of the Galileo project, or even who knows what will come out of Skywatcher. Remains to be seen about Skywatcher's intentions, but I'm interested to see what they put out in the not too distant future. So let's now pivot, folks, and we'll jump into the rundown. Just got a couple of stories close to home that may be of interest. And there is a wonderful channel out there. I would encourage you to check it out. The UFOs. Reese did a wonderful interview only very recently with Ross Coulthart. I've been in contact with Reese really since his channel has gone public, and he has done some great interviews, did a great interview with Bill Chalker. He's done some great research on his great-grandfather, who, like my uncle, was based at Woomera in South Australia, and Woomera has been long rumored to be a place where that was either involved in the UAP topic in Australian context. There was certainly a lot of UAP UFO sightings in and around Woomera in the 50s and 60s. So this is a wonderful interview that Reese did with Ross Coulthart. I've got a couple of clips that Reese has permitted me to play. I've linked it in the show notes below. And yep, certainly, echo your sentiments there, Jojo Diamonds. Really, really good interview. So if you haven't seen it already, do check it out, because Reese, being an Australian like me, we're both very interested to explore UAP UFOs in Australian context. And Reese asked some really great questions of Ross that are very Australian centric. So let's use that as a segue into this first clip from Reese's interview on the UFO Aussie YouTube channel with Ross Coulthart. And just to kind of set this clip up for you. So in this clip, basically Reese and Ross talking about there being no official knowledge by the Australian government on crash retrieval, the allegation of crash retrieval and reverse engineering programs that we're hearing out of the US from whistleblowers, and highlights how those in positions of authority and leadership in government, like we've just covered in the case of then Chief of Air Force Air Marshal Robert Chipman, how these people in positions of leadership in government aren't being read in to the idea or the notion of there being crash retrieval programs and reverse engineering programs. So have a watch of this clip, and we'll talk about it a little bit on the other side.
I'm told by people in the United States, not Australian citizens, American citizens who've been part of this program, that it is a very frequent, almost routine thing for anomalous objects to be recorded by the satellites, and not just on video. We're talking about telemetry data, infrared, tracking data, and this has been going on systematically for many, many years. What's fascinating to me is how little the Australians know. There are definitely, because I've spoken to some of them, individual Australians who, largely because of liaison, there are pilots, for example, that have flown in the Nevada test range, and they've been briefed into certain things that they might see there that they're not allowed to talk about, which ironically they've been told they're not even allowed to tell their Australian military bosses about, and they don't. And so you've got this ridiculous situation where officially, I can tell you, the Prime Minister of Australia, the Cabinet of Australia, which is our obviously executive government command, the Defence Minister, the intelligence community people, the bosses of those agencies have no idea what's been going on. And they're not read in to what we're talking about here. What is going on, I do believe, is there has been long going a collaboration between certain select people in the American intelligence community and certain select people occasionally in the Australian defence and intelligence community who are kind of read in, briefed in a discreet kind of a way individually as sort of trusted chaps that we can tell this story to. And I've been privileged enough to engage with people, I have to protect sources, who have conveyed to me that there is no official Australian government knowledge of this program, period. They have not been read in, which is a disgrace, really. If you think about the fact that Australia has been a loyal and some might say lickspittle ally of the United States, following it into every single war since the First World War that the US has been engaged in. You know, there are few allies in the world more loyal to the United States than Australia, and especially since the fall of Singapore in the 1940s, when Australia learned that we couldn't hang on the British Empire any longer, America became our firm ally. And that's largely been a very positive and good military alliance. But as an Australian, I find it concerning that I know things that my government doesn't know.
And we've just shown that in what we've covered thus far. And isn't it, you know, I mean, it comes as no surprise. I mean, what are the chances that the Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Robert Chipman, or the Chief of the Defence Force, or the Vice Chief of the Defence Force, what are the chances that they would be read into or be, briefed on the reality of, if it is a reality, of crash retrieval and reverse engineering programs? None in Buckley's, because they're not even being told about bloody briefings that Australia's having with the UAPTF and AARO to start with, which is, AARO has told us time and time again, it has not yet found any evidence to suggest that any of these reports are a result of any extraterrestrial intelligence or presence or non-human intelligence. They haven't found any corroborative evidence for any of the claims that have been put forward thus far. So again, what are the chances that those in positions of leadership, the Defence Minister, the Prime Minister, certainly in defence, I doubt they'd be read, if they're not even being read into the most basic of information, or they're not being shared, that information not being shared with them. Maybe it is, and they're lying about it. Again, we just don't know. It is interesting. It is concerning. I mean, it's great that Ross is getting all of this information from his sources, but it's concerning that Ross knows more than those that we entrust with our taxpayer dollars and those to defend our country. They don't know what folks that don't have a security clearance like Ross know. So Ross knows more than, I would say, most people within the certainly the Australian Defence Force in positions of leadership, and probably those in the Defence Intelligence Service as well, as he's well connected with a lot of US defence and intelligence officials. So lickspittle, haven't heard that term for a while. Person who praises and tries to please people in authority, usually in order to get some advantage from them. Yep. So that was I just found that to be an interesting clip. Let's go on to the next clip in this interview between Ross and Reese. This is really now talking about the implications of there being, what are the implications if there is a real crash retrieval and reverse engineering program? What does it mean for Australia and the Five Eyes if they're being completely left in the dark? So watch this clip and we'll talk about it on the other end.
I've spoken to very senior people, let's say, in our government about things like the AUKUS agreement, which is an agreement where Australia is buying $368 billion Australian of Virginia-class nuclear attack submarines from the United States. And my sources in the American military are telling me that deal's never going to go ahead. There is no way it's ever going to happen, and yet we're spending already hundreds of millions of dollars on preparing for that possibility. But more importantly, if what you and I are learning in our research into UAPs is true, if it is true that the United States has a retrieval program of highly advanced non-human technology and that it's been essentially trying to reverse engineer that technology for much of the last 60 or 70 years, the implications of that are that we are being lied to as an ally of the United States. That's what worries me as a journalist, that I've seen young Australian men and women go to war and fight stupid wars in Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, and I've covered Iraq and Afghanistan, and I've seen people die, and I don't want to see that again when we know that the Americans are involved in a program that they're not revealing to one of their closest allies. That's what's at the heart of my issue with the dishonesty behind the Five Eyes Alliance, that I've actually been privileged to speak to people who have confided in me that as Australians, they know what I'm talking about. They're aware, because of their intelligence or defence background, of something that they were read into by their American friends, largely when they were working in collaboration with the Americans on other things. One that I can talk about, for example, is a Defence Department photographer from Australia who was based in Darwin, at a military base in Darwin. And this is how it works. Basically, the Americans found something in the Borneo jungle, Kalimantan. It was a craft, I'm told. The person who tells this story is a former Australian military person. The allegation is the Americans rang the Australian Defence Department and said, "Oh, can we borrow a photographer?" And this is so often the case that what happens is these Australians are sent by their Australian bosses. We're so happy to help our American friends. We don't actually ask what they're doing. The Americans just say, "Can we borrow somebody?" "Sure, yeah, you can borrow one of our photographers." So this guy's picked up by a C-130 and flown to Malaysia and then on to Kalimantan. Whereupon he is met by a team of Special Forces operatives who essentially swear him to secrecy, and he is taken to photograph the inside and outside of an alien craft recovered from the jungle. I kid you not. And this account, I know, has never been related to the Australian government, because this photographer was told by his American ally friends not to report it to the Australian government. That's how dishonest this is. And the reason I can tell you that story is because that photographer is now dead.
Okay.
And what's interesting is, to some degree, I've been able to corroborate aspects of his story, in the sense that I know that there was some kind of a military operation in a particular area at a particular time. So there are things like that that I've been working on as a journalist that go to the idea that we're being played by our American cousin. Not that we don't love them to death. I love America. I am very, very grateful for the Defence Alliance that we've had, that has kept you and me and everybody watching this in peace for the last 60 to 80 years. We should be grateful for that. But there's a fundamental dishonesty lying at the heart of the Five Eyes Alliance right now, and only a very few people know about it. Britain knows about it. I suspect France knows about it. And I suspect Canada knows about it. But New Zealand and Australia, the junior cousins in the Five Eyes Alliance, were being kept out of it.
In the dark.
Your grandfather knew, I suspect. And he's one of the classic illustrations of how it works. He was working with the Brits. He was on an exchange with the Brits, working in the RAF at a very, very senior level, and he was asked to participate, as you say, in a UFO investigation that was kept completely off the books. Before we did this interview, I was actually checking with my friends in the UK to see if any of those records still exist, and I noticed that all of the files from the 40s and the 50s in the British archives on UFOs have been trashed. Why?
There's a lot to unpack there, but it's, Ross makes some really good points. If crash retrievals and reverse engineering is a reality, and Australia, and Ross has talked about this before, Australia is part of the AUKUS agreement, a trilateral alliance between the US, Australia, and the UK. If we're about to invest, spend taxpayer dollars, $500 billion on these 3 Virginia-class nuclear attack submarines, and the US has got some incredibly disruptive technology that outperforms everything else on the planet, exotic propulsion, craft that's been derived from NHI Tech. We're about to spend $500 billion on basically lemons. We're buying it, and I know a lot of people love the Datsun 180B, but we're going to buy 3 Datsun 180Bs when you've got the US, using the latest and greatest Teslas that are out and about there, and we're trying to expect that these Virginia-class nuclear attack subs are going to fare us well if we have a conflict in the Indo-Pacific with China. I mean, far out. And again, this is all purely speculative, but if it's true, then it's apparent that if we're investing that much money in outdated technology, why is the US not being honest with its brothers and sisters across the pond in Australia and New Zealand? So yeah, it's an odd one. Short Order Cook One's comments, interesting that these contracts that we had for subs were with France before they were taking the US. Yeah, and you know what? Australia tore up the contract, and what did we have to do? We had to pay, was it $900 million in compensation to the French government? I mean, talk about waste, fraud, and abuse, wastage of taxpayer dollars, $900 million. I mean, $22 million was spent on ORSAP. Throw a couple of $1 million on setting up an investigatory body in Australia that will get off its ass and investigate using the scientific method, UAP. I mean, what an absolute waste of taxpayer dollars, which is incredibly frustrating. Jimmy's earlier comments, who is the air attaché who serves as the Chief of Air Force Representative of North America? They may have some answers. I've actually gone after the air and space attaché through FOIA for records pertaining to UAP, and unfortunately nothing. I haven't been able to yield any fruit from my requests to date, but I suspect, I may wish to revisit that down the road. Yeah, I haven't had any success getting anything through the defense attachés based in Washington, D.C. Yep, $900 million for a default on a contract. What a disgrace! What an absolute disgrace. So I hope you found that clip of interest. If we move on, got a couple of the clips. In this next clip, Ross talks about Australia being kept in the dark, and perhaps that the need to know really resides within private aerospace companies, and that there have been reports of Australians being involved in crash retrievals, and that there have been crash retrievals even on Australian soil without the knowledge of the Australian government. So let's have a look at this clip from their interview.
By people who've been at ministerial level in our government, that there is not some cover-up. The Americans haven't come to the Australian government and said, I say, old chap, keep this one quiet, but we've dug up a few UFOs and, we're just working on them at the moment, and don't tell anyone, please. It really isn't the case. Australia has been kept in the dark.
I wanted to ask on that then. So there's been obviously a lot of talk about the role of private aerospace with the alleged crash retrieval program. In Australia, we do have quite a prominent role with these private aerospace contractors at areas like Woomera, where there are sensitive facilities essentially lent or leased to these contractors to use for their sort of at their own accord. And it made me wonder, do you think there is private aerospace contractors, I guess, operating or holding the UFO portfolio in Australia under an international umbrella where maybe only a few defence officials in the Australian Defence Department are brought into it, only on a need-to-know basis?
Yeah. That's exactly what's going on. Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Battelle. I mean, for a start, all three of those companies are heavily involved in what I understand is the retrieval and reverse engineering operations involving non-human tech. I just know that for a fact. It's not some belief system of mine. I just know it for a fact. I'm in touch with people who are working in the legacy retrieval reverse engineering program, and they tell me all three of those companies, well, actually Battelle's a federally funded research corporation that's part of the US government. They've all intimately been involved in the attempt to reverse engineer non-human technology for the last 80 years plus. And the interesting thing, the interesting thing is they are based in Australia. And I am told, I've not been able to verify this, but I'm talking to someone who says that they are in touch directly with a privately run group that essentially is like an umbrella organisation for these groups that are concealing the existence of this coalition. And there are Australians involved in that. One of the people I'm thinking of is a person who used to work for the Defence Signals Directorate, who has certainly passed themselves off as someone who is aware of the existence of this kind of collaboration on retrievals, and they coordinate retrievals. There are allegations that there have been retrievals in recent years in Australia involving non-human technology. I had a situation a few years back where a farmer contacted me in a particular part of Queensland, which is in the northeastern region of Australia, and that farmer told me that there were all these American left-hand drive vehicles coming out of a giant American plane that had landed nearby that were driving around the outback looking for something. And he sent me photographs of some of those vehicles. And I'm still investigating that case, but I have a feeling that there was a covert US retrieval operation that took place on Australian soil without the knowledge of anyone in the Australian government.
That's quite incredible. I'm not surprised if it is going on, though, in the sense that Australia is a massive country, and considering how it's not very populated in the centre and there's so much remote territory there, and you think about where these alleged crashes have occurred, it would make sense that if they did happen in Australia, they probably would be in these sort of in the middle of the desert, in the red territory.
I mean, somebody gave me a tip at one stage that a lot of this was run, and I don't think this is right anymore, but the suggestion was made that the Foreign Material Exploitation Program, which used to be known as the Foreign Technology Program, is a program operated and run by the Defence Intelligence Agency of the United States. And somebody suggested to me that Australia regularly contributed people to assist in the FMEP, the Foreign Material Exploitation Program, which was originally designed as a program to exploit retrieved foreign adversary technology, say MiG fighters from Russia or Chinese weaponry, North Korean weaponry. It was suggested to me that the FMEP, that Foreign Material Exploitation Program, was also being used as a cover by the Americans for the retrieval of non-human craft. I'm told that's what Australia gets told it's for when they borrow Special Forces personnel. So it's the cover that's used when the Yanks ask Australia if they can borrow some of our boys to go off and retrieve something. And this has happened. I've spoken to people in the Special Forces community who've told me they've participated in retrieval operations. And more importantly, on some occasions, they've been asked to sign non-disclosure agreements to not reveal this to their own government in Australia. So these are serving military personnel in Australia who are seconded, for example, to the British SAS in Hereford, 22 SAS, or to the Special Boat Service in the United Kingdom, and there's been European retrievals that Australians have been involved in as a result of their secondment to those operations. And knowing these guys, they're patriots, they love their country, they love Australia, but they also have a deep respect for the American alliance, and they just implicitly assume that this must be being understood at a very high level by the Australian government, because there's no way that the Americans would conspire to keep this secret from the Australian government. And when I've had the conversation with them, look, I've spoken to former prime ministers, I've spoken to former defence ministers, nobody knows about this.
Yeah.
And they're shocked because they've been told to keep quiet about it at their level on the ground as the combat soldier that's involved in these operations. And they are telling me they have been involved in the retrieval of non-human technology, period. End of story.
So that's fascinating from Ross. I mean, that's the most I've heard Ross ever talk about Australian involvement in crash retrievals. And I know Bill Chalker has done some great research in the past, and he's documented, I think, in some of his research, reports of crash retrievals over the years, over the decades in Australia. But I've never heard that level of depth from Ross. He's talked briefly about SAS involvement in crash retrievals in the past. He talked about that photographer that was seconded to take photos of a retrieval. I think he talked about that last year at some point, but I have not heard him go into this much detail about allegations of Australian involvement in crash retrievals. And that's what's great about having Ross and sit down with the Reese, because Reese is really interested to get at the heart of what Ross knows in an Australian context, because so much of what Ross reports on is what's happening in the US, but there's so much history on this topic in our own backyard, and I would just love for Ross to expand on that and go into even more detail and reveal what he can. But I suspect he is, in an effort to protect sources, he will only go to the line and not cross it. Britt, great to see you, my friend. Thanks for joining from X. He wasn't speaking about. He was speaking about an incident, but I don't know if it is publicly known or if he revealed any additional information. But he may have covered up in that interview. I can't quite recall because it was a few days ago that I watched it, and I can't remember. That's what happens when you've got kids. And but feel free to have a look at it. If I've linked that interview in the show notes below if you want to check it out. So again, if it's just so frustrating that you've got folks in positions of leadership in government and mainly defence that aren't even aware of the fact that Australia is having discussions with the UAP Task Force or AARO. What are the chances they're going to be having? They've got an awareness of the reality, if it is a reality, of crash retrieval programs that are either happening on Australian soil or have involved Australian personnel. So it just, it makes me worry sometimes that there is such a degree of incompetence and the feeling that the Australian government just simply doesn't give a flying stuff about this topic. Those that are, maybe in the positions of authority, maybe it's some of the middle level folks that actually know, and I know that others have suggested that over time. And yeah, it makes me angry as well, Aaron. I certainly hear you on that front. Bex, he was speaking about Michael Herrera in some of that evidence. I know he's spoke about Michael Herrera in the past. Interesting character, Michael Herrera. I'm not too sure what what to make of his claims. But anyway, let's keep the ball rolling. This next clip is one that I really enjoyed. I enjoyed hearing it when I listened to the interview because it talks about obviously a case that is near and dear to all of our hearts, one that I am fascinated by even still to this very day after having done so many deep dives of it, and that is the Westall flying saucer incident of the 6th of April, 1966. So Reese asked some questions of Ross about the Westall incident.
April 6, 1966, we had the Westall incident here in Australia, which was a mass sighting over a school. There was clearly a cover-up in the sense that there was massive military involvement. There is zero documentation that's able to be tracked. What do you think happened there? And do you think that incident will ever be resolved?
It's funny because a good friend of mine, Keith Basterfield, has suggested that it was just a balloon, and we can assume that it was just an inadvertent stray balloon that strolled in from an American operation. And I just don't think that's true at all. I honestly think this was something anomalous. And what really persuaded me of this was Andrew Greenwood, the science teacher at the school who was in the playground with these hundreds of kids, many of whom I've spoken to. And he saw with his own eyes these 2, maybe 3, he's not sure, elliptical metallic discs hovering over the playground in broad daylight. And Andrew described seeing what these kids also described, which is seeing one of these objects then descend down into the Grange. And he and other teachers were yelling at these kids not to jump over the fence, but of course some of them did. And some of the kids that did jump over the fence and went really close to this object describe irrefutably a constructed mechanical object, not a balloon. And to this day, all of those people, some of whom are now in their late 60s, are adamant that what they experienced was some kind of alien spacecraft. What was the most telling part of the story for me was what happened to Andrew Greenwood later that week after he'd spoken publicly, I think to local media, about what he'd seen. And he gets a knock on his door, and he's a young teacher at a school, starting out as a young teacher. This is the mid-1960s. And standing on his doorstep, there's one guy in uniform, he's an Australian military official, and there's another guy in civilian clothes. And they basically threaten him. And they say, if you don't shut up about this, you will not work as a teacher. It will become known that you are an alcoholic, which was a total lie. And they were basically threatening him to shut the hell up about it. And one of the things I've done a lot of in my career is sit down with people who have secrets that they have a great difficulty talking about because it's the first time they've really spoken about it. Andrew was like that. It was a huge decision for him to go on camera with me for the first time and speak publicly about what happened to him, because all his life, for 60 years, he'd been threatened by these pricks that turned up on his doorstep. And then one thing I haven't spoken a lot about publicly is I then got a contact phone call from somebody I've known from a very long time, somebody who was in a very senior role in the Australian Federal Police. And that person, when they were a child, a young boy, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, I can't remember exactly how old they were, their dad was very senior in civil aviation in Australia. And it turned out his father is the guy who wrote the secret investigation report for the then Department of Supply, which was an external organisation that ran the whole Maralinga and Woomera operation and did all the UFO investigations.
I know it well.
His father was the Civil Aviation Authority figure who essentially investigated the Westall incident. And he remembered in great detail his father getting picked up in a government car, and it was all very hush-hush and secret, and then being taken to the Westall school for 3 or 4 days in a row. And he also remembered his mother and father having hushed conversations about how there was a copy of the report that had been kept in the house, and his father was really worried about it because he'd kept a copy of the report. And for a moment I was thinking, oh my God, we could find a copy of this report. And it turns out that his mother destroyed it. He remembers his mother burning it in the garden after the father died. And what's interesting is that person has described to me how the family, in the years subsequent when they moved to Canberra, they had UFO visitations at the family home. And he's a bit embarrassed about talking about it because he's a very, very senior, former retired federal police officer who thinks, got to be strong about this sort of stuff. But they were completely freaked out, the family, by UFO craft flying over the family home that he and his sister saw. And I confirmed this with his sister. And what's interesting to me is there was a cover-up on Westall, and I suspect that somewhere deep in the archives of the Defence Department there is an as yet unreleased Department of Supply file that has never come within cooee of the National Archives, because the National Archives in Australia are good people, and the way it works, contrary to FOI, there is a presumption of release after 30 years with National Archives documents. And so I went and spoke at the National Archives about the UFO mystery, and they were really lovely people. And one of the people who was running the archives at the time was a former head of IT for ASIO, which is one of our intelligence services. And we went for dinner, and I explained that I was trying to find this file that had been written, this report that had been written about Westall, and he was great. He deployed his staff to try and find out about it, and basically its existence is denied, or knowledge thereof is denied by the Defence Department. But as I've learned from previous investigations, you don't know what you can't find. And there's an enormous amount of data that has never been categorised or catalogued inside the Defence Department that was handed over by the Department of Supply when it was made defunct after Maralinga and Woomera, and just put into the darkest archives of the Defence Department. It's never been catalogued. And I've spoken to people who've told me they've seen some of these files physically sitting on shelves inside the Defence Department. And it's so frustrating because I've literally given the location of some of these shelves to people in the National Archives, and they've told me there's nothing there that pertains to this. And so either it's a cover-up or a cock-up. I always assume a cock-up before a conspiracy, and it's a bit like the Raiders of the Lost Ark. There's probably a Lost Ark of the Covenant sitting on a shelf in the Defence Department somewhere in the US, a la Indiana Jones. And there's this secret Westall report that I know for a fact was written.
It had to have been. And I think when you think about as well that maybe like private aerospace or intelligence agencies are exempt from freedom of information, that report may be sitting somewhere there that essentially can't be accessed because they don't need to be able to release it.
A lot of the time we assume, I was guilty of this in my youth. As a journalist, I'd always see a conspiracy, whereas 9 times out of 10, it's a cock-up.
Oh, it's just so frustrating. I've heard this quite a few times from Ross and other researchers that there was this comprehensive Department of Supply, which is now a defunct government organization, that there was an investigation into the Westall incident, and a formal report was compiled by the Department of Supply, and that it has never seen the light of day. And kudos to Ross for at least getting some being able to connect with some sources that were able to provide him with more information. But just so frustrating that the report has never seen the light of day. Either it doesn't exist anymore because it's been destroyed, or it is sitting under at the bottom of some big old dusty box that has not been released to the National Archives of Australia. It's sitting in a warehouse somewhere for one of the defence organizations, and they've just got their documents that they've never digitized, or they're just sitting there. That's the stuff that's so frustrating. And I think Ross's quote there, we don't know what we can't find, is so very true. Because I am sure there are tons more records on your UAP in an Australian context sitting at the bottom of a drawer or filing cabinet, or in a dusty box that has not yet seen the light of day. And an example of that is good credit to Bill Chalker, who was requested to do he wanted to do an appraisal of the Air Force's UFO files, and they gave him permission to do exactly that. So he went in there, and I don't think the Air Force, they didn't know what was in their files, so they wanted Bill to do an appraisal to let them know what was in their files, and Bill was able to get some really fascinating insights into the Air Force's history of investigating the UAP topic. But I mean, look where we are today. It's a completely different toss of the coin, isn't it? The Royal Australian Air Force and Australian Department of Defence don't want anything to do with the topic, at least publicly anyway. And we know that, Defence Intelligence Organization is more than likely where a lot of these discussions and information is being kept and gatekept, and it's not even being shared with those that have a need to know, like the Chief of Air Force, who leads all discussions on UAP. So frustrating, so very frustrating, but fascinating clip on Westall. I did a documentary a couple of years ago on the Westall flying saucer incident. I was fortunate enough to meet and interview a number of the witnesses. If you're interested to look it out, if you haven't seen it before, it is on the channel called the Westall Witnesses. So feel free to check it out if you're interested. Coming to the back end, folks, I just want to play a couple more clips for you. So I've only got a few more clips to get through. Again, this is all in the link to Reese's interview with Ross is in the show notes below, so do check it out. This is one that Jimmy will obviously find very interesting. I know he has an affection for Diana Walsh-Pasulka's Grey Man. Reese asked Ross a question about Grey Man because his identity remains elusive, and I think he is a very interesting identity on this topic. Certainly for us as Australians, because it is alleged that he is an Australian. So, and obviously Diana Walsh-Pasulka goes into some detail in her book Encounters on Grey Man, but this is what Reese had to ask Ross about Grey Man in his interview.
An Australian pseudonym assigned to someone called the Grey Man in Diana Pasulka's book Encounters, and it seems as if almost his work is similar in nature to another character mentioned in Diana Pasulka's books,
Tim
Tyler D. Yes, Tim Taylor. Can you speak to anything about the nature of their work, if it is similar, and if there is a relationship?
Not that I can reveal publicly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's under wraps.
Yeah. I've got a hunch as to who it is. Well, I know who it is, and I can understand why she's keeping it confidential. There's no nefarious reason for it. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a very interesting story.
And what's frustrating is Timothy Taylor has not come forward. He kind of remains in the shadows. And Grey Man, we don't know anything about Grey Man. Is Grey Man? I mean, one of my New Year's resolutions was to do a deep dive on Grey Man and to find out more. And it's been very, very hard to get get some leads on Grey Man. But I think both Grey Man, being an Australian, and Timothy Taylor, who we know is very much has an active, or has had an active interest in the topic, and introducing both Diana Walsh-Pasulka and Dr. Gary Nolan to a crash site or a gifting field where they were taken blindfolded to an area in, I believe, was it New Mexico or Arizona? Not too sure, to inspect materials. Yes, Jimmy is absolutely right. Grey Man and Timothy Taylor, the ghost that walks. I know Jimmy is determined to find more information on Timothy Taylor and Grey Man, and more often than not, I rely on what he finds out, because it is very interesting. It would be interesting to learn a lot more about those two individuals. And will Timothy Taylor ever come forward publicly? I don't know. Will Grey Man ever get revealed? One can hope. So who knows? Teleconnect, Westall 66 and RL 94 are both real NHI UAP events and truly historical moments of human history. Yeah, it's so comparable in many respects. Children both saw craft. Ariel school incident, obviously they saw, reported seeing some sort of beings. There was no reports of beings, I believe, being observed at Westall, but the fact that it was a school sighting, so many children saw it, they drew what they saw. Yeah, very interesting and comparable in so many respects. Shannon Safe Designs, America wouldn't piss on Australia if you were on fire, so don't understand why Australia coattails the US. I can't give you anything on that one. Todd T, AARO director, in an interview yesterday, I believe it was on ABC, just admitted perhaps some UAP could be NHI. So I think he said, they said, is it possible that some of these things are NHI? He says anything is possible. So at least you've got Dr. John Kozlowski, who is presenting himself as a little bit more open than the former director, Sean Kirkpatrick. So, I know Anna Paulina Luna is really doesn't have a lot of faith in AARO and wants to defund AARO, and maybe more inclined to throw some money at the FBI, knowing that they have an X-Files office, so to speak. But I don't know. I'm still cautiously optimistic to see what Dr. John Kozlowski can come up with, because remember, he was the NSA liaison for the UAP Task Force. And it certainly sounds like the UAP Task Force under Jay Stratton's leadership were a lot more open and open-minded about the NHI possible connection, the woo factor. There are a lot of I don't know. I think AARO, it'll be interesting to see how Dr. John Kozlowski progresses throughout his tenure as the AARO director. So I haven't given up hope on Dr. Kozlowski, but I think I think Sean Kirkpatrick was a terrible pick for the AARO director. He just did not have any enthusiasm for the job at all. I think, in fact, he was ordered to do the job, as his last assignment. And now that's forever his legacy, known as the UFO hunter that really led to greater distrust and by the public in AARO, thinking it was just a front for the intelligence community. I don't know any of that to be true, but I'm pleased that there's at least someone that sounds like they're a lot more proactive and open-minded in their approach to achieving AARO's mission, and that in Dr. John Kozlowski. Last clip that I wanted to show you, folks. Let me play this one. This is the last clip from Reese's interview with Ross. Again, linked in the show notes below, so do check it out if you haven't already seen it. This is a good question to end, pretty much get close to ending the show on. Reese asked Ross, what can Australians do to help move the needle?
Probably the final question I want to ask is, we've seen the UAP Disclosure Fund pushing the narrative to try and get disclosure in the United States. Here in Australia, we know that the government has their head in the sand. We've seen Penny Wong's response on that before as well. And it just seems like we're 20 years behind where the US is right now.
Sure.
What can we do in Australia to try and push the needle forward?
What you're doing.
Okay.
Popularising the issue, making the public aware that this is not a subject to be stigmatized or ridiculed. One of the things I find fascinating is there is very clearly an attempt by intelligence agencies around the world to control the public narrative on UFOs. It's not some accident. It's not some vestigial remnant of attitudes that existed 40 or 50 years ago. This is an ongoing attempt to gag the public's knowledge of the UAP issue. What interests me, though, is the tyranny of the internet. The fact that you and I can create shows that are independent of mainstream media. And in my case, I'm not being arrogant about this. I am blown away by the level of interest. I seem to have tapped into a public engagement with an issue that I didn't know was there. I've been completely taken by surprise with the level of engagement and interest on this subject. Some of the stuff that I've posted even in recent weeks has reached 4.5 million views in just 2 weeks. All over the world, there are audiences far larger than, say, the show that I used to work for, 60 Minutes. You know, if they got 500,000 views under the old rating systems, they were happy. They're lucky if they get that these days. Not being arrogant about it, but the UAP subject is drawing millions of people from all over the world who just don't buy the cover-up. And they're moving from mainstream media to non-mainstream media outlets like mine and yours to get their information. Instagram, TikTok, that's where the change is happening. And what's infuriating the US is they can't control it. That's why I think they want to control social media. They're shocked at the way that social media is taking the X and the millennial generation down burrows that, frankly, they want concealed. I mean, some of the most interesting and effective journalism of recent years has been journalism that has, for example, exposed the lies of the reason why we went to a war in Iraq. Most people still to this day have no idea that the basis upon which we deployed to Iraq and got involved in a 20-year war in both Iraq and Afghanistan was on a misguided, false claim that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. That was a lie, and they knew it was a lie. During the COVID, we were told that masks and COVID vaccines were absolutely essential to protect us and that these were safe vaccines that were delivering as a protection. That was a lie, and they knew it was a lie. And the best journalism that's been revealing that has come from non-mainstream media. In fact, the mainstream media colluded in the cover-up, as they are on UAPs. And it's basically because what's happened is not some dark conspiracy. It's not the CIA walking into the offices of the Sydney Morning Herald or the Australian newspaper and saying, you shall not publish this. It's firstly a vestigial remnant taboo and stigma attached to the subject of UFOs. It's also the fact that these organisations that once used to have rivers of gold of advertising revenue, they don't have that money anymore. The truth is, investigative journalism in mainstream media is derisorily underfunded. When the budget cutting happens in newspapers and television, the first things that get cut are investigative journalism. I have been working on this one story, UFOs, as an investigative journalist now for nearly 8 years. And it's making me a living, God knows why, but I'm pleased it is. Just. The thing that fascinates me is, as a journalist at 60 Minutes, one of the world's most well-resourced public affairs program, if I had 3 weeks to investigate an issue, I was lucky. That's the issue. The issue is that the business model of classified advertising revenue-derived journalism that essentially drove public agendas and influenced public opinion is now woefully underfunded to deal with what is the biggest secret of our time. And this is where the tyranny of the internet comes in, the delightful anarchy of the internet, that people like myself can fund themselves, which is what I am doing at considerable cost, to do these investigations. I am not, as so many intelligence trolls suggest on the internet, a UFO grifter making millions of dollars out of covering this subject. I am seriously in hock for covering this subject. But the reason why I'm doing it is because I happen to think it's the most important subject I've ever covered. And at the same time that millions of people are gravitating to my coverage of this subject, which I hope doesn't sound arrogant, mainstream media is constantly dying. And I can't wait for it to die. I want to put a stake through the heart of mainstream media because it has failed, singularly failed, to cover some of the most important issues of our time in recent years. And the reason why is because it took its eye off the ball. And the biggest story that should be being covered, and history will record this as an egregious failure by the mainstream media, is the UFO subject. It allowed itself to be manipulated. It allowed itself to be disinformed. It giggled its way to blind ignorance.
Can't argue with any of what Ross said there. I mean, it is true the mainstream media is turning into the lamestream media. And I mean, look how many stories on the topic of UAP, which is the only topic that I follow on X. I mean, all of my engagement on the UAP topic is on X, and I just report on what I find on YouTube. But I mean, how many stories, new information gets reported on from X? I mean, you've got the BAS ORSAP documents got put out the other day by Jonathan Davies on X. You've got your reporting from findings from John Greenwald Jr. You've got what Douglas Dean Johnson puts out. You've got what your other Keith Basterfield does a great job reporting on. Things that are current, and so a lot of these, just everyday curious folks that are, some are veteran researchers, others like myself are just interested, curious, and concerned citizens. And I mean, I've been on the beat now, tracking Australia's lack of engagement on the UAP topic since, early 2022. And I'm, not to blow my own trumpet, but I'm not aware of anyone else that's probably been as engaged on trying to get answers from the government and help those that we elect into positions of leadership, like Senator Whish-Wilson, to get answers as well. And Ross is very right in what he's saying there. In his 60 Minutes days, he'd be lucky to get 3 weeks to investigate a story. He's got the advantage and the what's the word? He's at the advantage of being able to spend years investigating one particular story. I mean, how long did he spend on the David Grush story before he was able to bring him forward in that interview for News Nation? I mean, and thankfully he's able to do this for a living, which, I mean, would be, so many of us would probably love to research and investigate the UAP topic full time. I know it's probably takes more of my time than my wife would like, but it's just such a fascinating topic, and I'm truly interested to learn as much as I can about not only the phenomenon, but also why my government, our Australian government, is not taking the topic seriously, when clearly there is a there to this topic. So put all the kind of, if you put all aside all of the woo-woo stuff, the speculation and claims without any evidence, that's why I like to bring you guys hard facts and data and documents and tangible stuff that's evidence, that's an official record of the Australian government or US government through FOIA, because that's information. Now, whilst it might not always be true, which we've seen time and time again, at least we can use that as a reference point. Claims without any evidence are just claims. And that's what's so frustrating about Dr. Stephen Greer's claims of his engagement with the former Australian Minister for Defence, Stephen Smith, Chris Bledsoe's claims of him being engaged by a representative of the Australian Department of Defence. They're things that we can't really follow up on without any evidence. And unfortunately, in Stephen Greer's case, he has not provided any evidence to support his claim to date. I've only found evidence that refutes his claim. So I'm not out to debunk a claim, but if there's anything that's UAP in Australia related, that piques my interest, and I'm keen to see if I can get any more information or supporting evidence that supports that claim, or pours cold water over it. So if my one bit of advice to anyone out there that is finds this topic very interesting is stay curious on it. I know there have been times when my interest has ebbed and flowed, and there have been a couple of times where I've wanted to walk away altogether out of frustration and feel like I'm, wasting wasting years of my life. But if there is even the smallest chance that everything that we're hearing is true, then that's the biggest paradigm shifting moment in our lives, in our generation. And even if it's not all true, but there are elements of it that are, that still makes it a topic worth pursuing and staying interested and engaged on. I don't buy into a lot of the claims that are put out there, but I find many of them fascinating. But those that I'm most interested in are those that have an Australian connection, being a proud Australian, proud of our alliance with the United States. And again, just so frustrated that as an Australian, we're so behind the eight ball on this topic, when it's clear, based on what we have heard time and time again from well-respected, highly credible, highly intelligent folks in the United States, that there are some real concerns to be had around the UAP topic, national security, safety of flight. But then you have, it goes much deeper than that, with all of the fantastical claims that you've heard from the likes of David Grush and others that have come forward. And I think it's just a fascinating topic, and I'm not planning on going away anytime soon, and want to continue to do what I can to try and advocate for Australia to take the topic seriously. So let me leave you with this, because I know I want to get out of here under the 3 hour mark. Westall. So everyone that watches this channel knows that I am very, very interested in Westall, and Ross talked at length there about Westall and this Department of Supply report. So following the show that I did last month, where we talked about Pine Gap, and it was the month before that when we talked about Australia was referenced in the JFK files. Well, unbeknownst to me, the CIA had a Far East Division office in Melbourne, Australia. And it got me thinking, well, if there was CIA in Australia in the, dating back to the 60s, and if the allegations of crash retrieval programs are in fact true, and if it is true that the CIA has a hand in crash retrievals, well, what if Westall was something truly anomalous that was retrieved from the Grange on the 6th of April, 1966? Would that be a worthy lead for follow-up? So I submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to the CIA on the 16th of April of this year, requesting, I asked, following the release, I think they've shortened some of the words, following the release of JFK assassination records in March 2025 by the National Archives, please be advised I wish to submit the following FOIA requests. I kindly request a copy of records created by and records received by the CIA FE Far East Division office located in Melbourne, Australia, for the date range of 1 April 1966 to 30 April 1966 inclusive, that include any of the following keywords: Westall, they haven't included the commas here, but Westall, Clayton School, Highball. Now, I didn't include UFO, flying saucer. I just wanted to keep it limited to those 3 keywords. Many thanks. I look forward to receiving a formal response in due course. So today, only today, I received a response from the CIA following that request, and this was their response letter, which I don't know how to take it. It's interesting. This letter is an acknowledgement of and a final response to your 15 April, so the US date, 25 Freedom of Information Act request received in the Office of the Information and Privacy Coordination on 16th of April, seeking records created and received by the CIA Far East Division office in Melbourne, Australia, 1 April 1966 to 30 April 1966. Now, they didn't reference the keywords that I asked for there, which was interesting, but they went on to say, after a thorough review of your request, we determined that responsive records, should any exist, so they're not saying they don't exist, they're not saying they do, should any exist, would be contained in operational files. The CIA Information Act, as amended, exempts CIA operational files from the search, review, publication, and disclosure requirements of the FOIA. This determination is not subject to an administrative appeal. Now, if there were records that are now almost 60 years old, 60 years next year, why would they still be exempt? Why would records that far back, if they exist, continue to be exempt? Yeah, I don't know. If this is the equivalent maybe of a Glomar response, we can neither confirm nor deny that records exist. I don't know. Is this the CIA's version of that? I don't know what to make of it, but it was not the response that I was expecting. So they've kind of left me hanging on that front, which is very, very frustrating. But that is the show, folks. We are going to get out under the 3-hour mark. So I'm pleased that those of you that have been with me from the start, thank you for sticking with me. Telekinetic, should a UN body investigate the human trafficking claims of the Michael Herrera incident in Indonesia 2009? Jake Barber corroborated aspects, and there doesn't seem to be any formal investigations. Yeah, I don't know what to make of that Indonesia 2009 account that Michael Herrera, because if you listen to Michael Herrera's team leader when he was in was it the Navy, the SEALs? I can't remember. His team leader was on an interview with Patrick from Vetted, and he just poured, Michael Herrera's team leader poured cold water all over Michael Herrera's account. So I don't know. I'm still bit dubious of Michael Herrera's claims. Again, would be nice to see some evidence for claims that are presented. Aaron, I agree. Australia needs its own David Grush. We do need a whistleblower. And Reese asked that question in his interview with Ross. So do watch it if you haven't already seen it. Bex, do you really think they have no interest in unknowns? I think that was following on Jimmy's comments. Unknowns and the unexplained is what the universe is all about. It should be studied, explored. That's why we as humans are here, in my opinion, to explore these unknowns, to keep that curiosity alive. Yeah, answer to questions that we don't know. Are we alone in the universe? Does God exist? What happens when you die? You know, they're the big three that everyone likes to talk about. So I agree with I concur with your sentiments there, Jimmy. Marie, thank you for joining, stopping by. Plant Watering Citizen, great to have you as well. Shorter to Cook One, always good to have you in the chat, my friend. Thank you for joining. Todd T, thank you for joining as well. Jimmy, always great to have you all in the chat as well, my friend. So look, thank you all for taking some time again out of your morning, your day, your evening, your graveyard shift. Always good to have such an engaged group in the chat. So really do appreciate you taking the time to comment, opine, and ask questions. I always will be happy to share your thoughts, comments, and questions throughout the chat. If you've enjoyed this episode, if you enjoy the content that I put out, do give it a like, share, subscribe. A lot of folks that watch the Unexplained Rundown aren't subscribers. So if you're not subscribed, smash that subscribe button. And as always, look forward to seeing you on another episode of the Unexplained Rundown. Until then, have a wonderful upcoming weekend and look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye for now.
If you have enjoyed this episode of the Unexplained Rundown, please consider giving it a thumbs up, sharing with your friends, family, colleagues, and social network, as well as subscribing to the channel. And if you'd like to be notified whenever the Unexplained Rundown goes live, premieres, or posts a new video, be sure to ring that cowbell.